Hello, everyone. We're live. It's Tormented by Gnomes with Ninja Man Matt. How you doing today, Matt?
Pretty darn good. Thank you.
Awesome. You may know Ninja Man Matt as the voice and mind behind Darius Ravengard in Descent into Avernus, the other campaign we run on this channel. He is also my longtime friend, game development buddy, and co-creator on the world of Anakra. Can I make gnomes roll disadvantage on speaking properly? I don't need the help.
Yeah, you don't need to do
I,
that.
I honestly, I'm good. Yeah. So essentially, we just decided we're gonna try to do these streams of some one sort or another every Thursday, at least until Critical Role comes back. Then we'll probably keep doing this sort of thing, just these hangout lore sessions, etc. Because even if you can't catch them live because you're watching Critical Role, you can always watch the VOD. Uh, but we've got a few things on the docket today. First off, we're going through some of the rules errata, which is super exciting and engaging stuff. Um, I've been playing D&D with Matt for 14, maybe 15 years.
Yeah, while.
Uh, we were playing 3rd edition, and he now DMs. He's DMing a long-running campaign with some of our friends in San Diego. He's run a few other games. So we have constant conversations about the rules, the lore, etc., etc. He's one of the friends that I have who is willing to go full scale nitty gritty, full nerd shit into the minor details of the. Ninja is loud
Oh yeah.
AF compared to you. That is not the normal problem. I've had volume issues recently with streams, and most of the time I have to turn other people down. So, uh, is it better to boost Matt or is it better to nerf Matt or buff gnomes right now, audio wise? Let me know.
I
Buff
just
gnomes,
pulled the
great.
mic out of my face, so hopefully that will help.
I've buffed myself. All right, great.
Oh, I like a buff gnome.
All right. All right. So we were just going over some of the rules of RADA. We figured we'd chat about that for a little bit. After that, Matt has developed a custom subclass for the rogue, which he's playtesting in Descent into Avernus. His character Darius is a master thrower rogue. It's a riff on a 3rd edition prestige class, the Master Thrower, that he's been working on porting over as a rogue subclass. And we'll go over some of the features and special abilities that set that subclass apart from the others in the core books. And then we'll talk about a class we are building from the ground up specifically for the world of Anakra, the Channeler.
Oh man, that has been a long time in the making.
Yes. Um, so let's dive right into the deep nerd shit. Recently, and I'll post a link to this in chat actually. They released a compendium of rules errata. Yes, the Master Thrower, aka Sideshow's ranked games.
But
This is the rules errata. They've been building it out for a while. They recently added some new notes to it. Nothing that really stood out to me, but mostly because it's very class and ability specific. I think some of the new rules errata has to do with a specific sorcerer spell feature and other stuff like that. The stuff that I'm really interested in is some specificity of the language in the rules that I think some DMs, definitely myself, sometimes miss out on.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see. For example, this is an important one, and I think it may have come up in the past. Bonus actions and actions are both actions for the purpose of things like uh, breaking invisibility. A bonus action, if it says that taking an action breaks invisibility, a bonus action counts, and other similar abilities. But they
Or the
are
slow spell. The slow spell talks about how you can only take one action or move. That would count action bonus action.
right. So you could still take a bonus action, but you could not. Actually, is that in here anywhere? Does it specify that you can't take bonus actions, but you can take actions, or is it just that you can only take
Well,
one action?
yeah, it comes. The slow spell specifies that you can, when you're slowed, you can take one action or a move. You can't do both. So you can either choose, for instance, to cast Healing Word as your action, or something else. But you wouldn't be able to, like, it wouldn't limit you per se, because again, it is an action. So it's just things like that. So
All right.
like you said, you can't exchange bonus actions for actions, but a bonus action does count as one.
Right. So if unless it specifies that you can't take bonus actions, if you can only take one action, you could do one of the two. But on your turn, let's say that you are a rogue with spellcasting, you couldn't use your action to dash. Well, you couldn't use your bonus action to dash and then cast Healing Word with your action. Or you couldn't do two things that require bonus actions and give up your action to do that.
Yes, that is what they specify with the errata. Yeah, is that you can't, even though technically a bonus action is like a smaller little fraction of time than an action would be, you wouldn't be able to, for instance, do two bonus actions and not take an action. It doesn't work that way.
Right. Right.
Which I feel like, again, for Adventures League, that makes sense. But if you were, homebrewing, and if someone was like, "Hey, man, I'd like to rage," and let's say if I'm a cross class barbarian cleric and cast Healing Word, even though you can't do that, I would probably let somebody do, because again, an action's supposed to be like, let's just say if you're looking at movements and actions, if moving takes 2 to 3 seconds and an action takes 2 to 3 seconds and a bonus
Bonus
action
action
takes
takes
a
one,
second,
right?
I'd probably be like, yeah, sure, you're using your action to do a bonus action. I probably would allow that. Uh, Not probably. I would either need to or I wouldn't. So far, it's never come up. I usually just say, hey, you've got one action or one bonus action, and people just kind of go with it.
I think part of what matters is if it's in good faith. For example, a barbarian spellcaster, and I imagine instead of aggressively, some guy in chat, a barbarian rage healing sounds like aggressively slapping bandages on someone. Because the spell he specified was Healing Word, I imagine it as being like this battle cry that you use to enter your rage, and use this battle cry to heal your ally and go forward into combat. And I would probably allow that, even like if it was tournament rules or PvP. No, but in a campaign, that's in good faith because Healing Word is good, but it's not great. And
I mean, it's OP, but yeah.
but it doesn't. It's not like if you had the Cure spell and you were in range to cure somebody instead of using Healing Word, Cure is going to get you more bang for your buck, and then you could use your bonus action. So it's not an
Absolutely.
optimal strategy. And here's the other thing: you're giving up like a barbarian. What do they want to do when they rage? They want to attack or yeet people. In the case of Crozan. So if
Oh, yeah.
instead of using your first turn when you rage to just start fragging nerds, you're throwing out a heal on your buddy, I consider that to be a good faith play. You're not trying to min max or cheat the DM.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
And a lot of the times when I'm making a decision about something a player wants to do, if they're bending the rules or it's an edge case or it's not covered, I think about intent. Are they
Absolutely.
trying to like find a loophole to win the game, or are they just trying to play their character, have fun, and be a good member of the team?
Oh, absolutely. Now that being said, again, this comes from the more min-maxy player side of me, but I don't think trying to find the optimal strategy in a game is bad. I think that if you try and take over someone's turn and make them do that, that's where it gets a little dicey. I think you can all day try and figure out the best thing that you want to do, but when it gets into saying, "Hey, so and so, you should do this," that's where it gets a little bit, dicey.
Well, I mean, I agree with you. You don't want to punish people who are trying to do optimal play, but there's also a certain spirit to it. There's a difference between trying to find the best, most tactically optimal thing to do and finding an exploit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if it feels like they're trying to find an exploit, I'm more likely to shut it down. That said, over the years, Matt's been a primary victim of this. My understanding of what is and is not an exploit has softened significantly.
Oh yeah.
Because
And like you said, I feel like like you said, intent is important. But I think a couple months ago, I sent you this big long thing about using a fallen Iasmar and the life transference spell. And because of the wording, you could probably make a case for basically martyring your life to be able to super heal someone else. And even though it gets a little weird with the language of some of the rules, I feel like that to me would not be breaking the game. Like
no,
I could upcast a cure wounds to like 5th level and get basically the same thing,
right. You found a weird, it may be a loophole, maybe a failure in the language of the spell, but it's also thematic as hell.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's still in the spirit. Whereas, the coffee lock.
Yes.
For those of
I
you,
ever.
for those of you who aren't familiar, warlocks have a limited spell pool that recharges on a short rest. Sorcerers have a currency called sorcery points. They can convert spells into sorcery points, and they can convert sorcery points into spells. but there is a loss there. If you turn a spell slot into sorcery points and then back again, you're going to get a smaller spell slot. So normally, there's no reason to do that. You would turn a spell slot into sorcery points because you need to use those points to supercharge a spell, to twin it or lengthen it or whatever. But the Coffee Lock is a build where you multiclass Warlock and Sorcerer, and then there's a certain interpretation of the rules where you take a short rest and your Warlock spells come back. You convert your Warlock spells into sorcery points, and then you convert those sorcery points into sorcerer spells, meaning you become a sorcerer who can recharge their spell pool on a short rest.
Yeah.
And then you can just chain short rests, and it's a lot of the standard shit that comes up in edge cases like this where the DM has to let you get away with it for it to actually be broken. And I think there was some debate on whether or not the verbiage actually worked. But to me, the Coffee Lock isn't a good faith character.
You said isn't or is a good faith character?
Is not a good faith. Like, unless there's the player who's playing them is not going to try to overshadow everybody. Like, that's the sort of build you make when you're trying to cheat the system and be overpowered, and you know, your kick is being better than everyone and everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, not at 100% all the time, but that's just sort of the feel that I get from the Coffee Lock, as opposed to I found a loophole in the rules where I can heal everybody, but it nukes me. That's great. That sounds cool.
I mean, one of the things they could do to easily fix that, which I think they don't want to necessarily quote unquote fix that, is that if they made it to where you could only sacrifice sorcerer spell slots in order to get, sorcerer spell slots to get points or vice versa. But then you're looking into territory like, messing up the paladin, because the paladin just has to burn spells in order to do their smiting. Paladin spells. So I think, like you said, there's a certain amount of just let the DM do his job and, police the crap out of it.
Well, all this errata starts out with covering rules as written, rules as intended, and rules as fun, right?
Absolutely.
And 5th edition, the way I always describe the different editions of the game is 3rd edition was we have a rule for everything.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is captured by the rules. The most robust rule. It was a broken rule system, but it was robust insofar as it covered everything.
Yeah, the grappling system was so complicated. You were like, okay, you two throw down. Whoever wins, that's the one who won the grapple. Because I don't want to fight in real life.
Fight in real life instead of rolling on the grappling tables.
Because it'll be so much less painful to do it in real life.
They break some ribs and it'll still be better. 4th edition was a great tactical combat system, but the rules were very much like, here's what you can do according to the rules.
It's so funny, and I know that you are a big fan of Colville as well. I actually found out about him because of you, and I initially was very in my, I would say my social media ignorance in terms of being able to apply 4th edition. Again, I was one of the people who was like, oh, 4th edition is just WoW on paper. That's all that is. But again, that's because I came in on Advanced D&D 2nd edition and then played 3. Yeah, and then played 3.5 where it was just that, but hey, there's a rule for everything. And then 4th edition came in and said, hey man, you can't even dual wield unless you do this specific thing, and it's an ability now. And that threw me. I think the thing that threw me for a loop with that was that I liked the idea of, again, having this character that started off as an urchin and was like, hey, I'm gonna either grab a spell book or pick up a dagger and earn my way in life and figure out who I want to be. And I didn't want to be pigeonholed into like, oh, I'm a paladin, that's all I'll ever be,
right,
or I'm this. And because again, when you picked your class in 4th edition, I believe, unless I'm wrong about this, but as I recall, you were locked into that class. There was no multi-classing. You had certain abilities that as you leveled up, you could pick from. You had your dailies, you had your, encounter powers, all this stuff. And the funny thing is, nowadays, I find myself kind of stealing a lot of those rules for 5th edition. I think it's because 4th edition kind of, in a way, married a bit of that, not locking you in, but just making things so simple. And it's funny, we talk about how simple 5th edition is, and it's one of the most approachable systems. I mean, a lot of our friends, Joseph, like we, again, do you think you ever would have gotten some of the people that we play with now into D&D had we started them on 3rd edition? Because I don't think so.
No, absolutely not. Like, the sheer process of creating a character and assigning all your skill points is overwhelming.
And even just explaining what all of that is and what it means,
like you have a separate modifier for oh, you're a fighter, so you gain one modifier a level, and you're a wizard, so you gain one modifier every 4 levels. But then your skills go up like this, like, and then you have the charts that tell you how many spells you get. Like, there are a lot of my friends who never would have got their foot in the door if they had to do all that crap.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so I feel like now that we're moving towards kind of it being more simplified, it almost again, I think it was too radical. I think going from 3rd to 4th edition was too much of a radical change that a lot of people just didn't even want to give it a chance. But now that like in 5th edition, people are a little more like, hey, okay, this is kind of a common balance. And the more you play it, the more you're kind of like, hey, I really wish that I could just easily say, let's just do a daily power. You know,
Right.
because everyone, depending on where you fall on the spectrum, some people love short rest, some people love, the short long rest thing. Some people go, it's a weird mechanic that shouldn't be, messed with. But it almost comes easier just to say, okay, you have a once a battle power, you have a once a day power.
Right.
Kind of that just becomes language most people use anyway. But anyways, we're getting off track with that.
No, there's no such thing as off track. We barely have a framework for this. The point is to hang out, talk about rules, and talk about some Anakra stuff. Like, so there is no off track. Like, honestly, one of the things that 4th edition, and I don't want to retread this ground because there's better videos about this out there, but one of the things that 4th edition did so well, they made healers not suck.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah.
they made wizards not OP anymore. But
Yeah.
there's this thing in D&D where as much as people complain about how boring it was to be a fighter in 3rd edition, which is fair, fighters in 3rd edition were boring.
See, I never got that, man. I loved fighters.
We never played high level. Like, the only high level campaign we played in 3rd edition, your character was not a fighter. You were this
No, that's true.
outrageous. You had all these fire abilities, and we used the Book of Nine Swords. The whole point of that book was to say, look, fighters can't do all the cool stuff wizards can. Let's make martial characters who can do cool stuff.
No, you're right. That's valid.
Like, at low levels, sure, getting weapon
No, you're
specialization
right.
is great.
I would say I loved a 3rd level fighter. I put 3 levels of fighter on everything because you
Yes.
need it.
Oh my god.
But that was also back when you couldn't move between attacks. I mean, you had to literally, if you wanted to be Aladdin or you wanted to be the Prince of Persia or anything like that, you had to either cross class into so much stuff or take so many feats just to be able to walk around and hit people.
Yeah, because you couldn't split move and fire, and the rules were
Because the game assumed. Yeah, because the game assumed that you started off with a 10 and everything, and then became a god by the end due to magic.
Exactly. So, like, 4th edition did a lot of stuff right. It was too radical. It's one of the most playable games. I think is one of the things you can say.
It really is.
You can sit down and you can just play it.
Well, and I think part of it, and again, not that you can't role play anything. Like, everybody can role play anywhere. I mean, heck, you can role play a soccer game. If you had a soccer sim for D&D, you could role play the crap out of that.
I was gonna say you could role play Risk, but go on.
Yeah. No, I mean, Risk really. I mean, come on, who doesn't actually talk like Mao Zedong when they are playing China in Risk? Come on. We had hats and everything, man. That was a thing. Anyways, but what I was getting at in 4th edition, I think by kind of like you were saying, making things a lot more streamlined, it opened up the table to people who actually wanted to focus on how their character was and who they were. They didn't have to worry about the minutia so much. They knew, oh, here's my daily powers, here's my all this, here's my all that, and they could really focus on what does it mean to be a paladin, which changed drastically since 3rd edition.
Yes.
Or what does it mean to be a wizard? And not even specifically that, because again, I don't remember if they had backgrounds. I'm not sure if that was a thing back then. But recall. You could really get into the meat of, hey, this is my dude, this is what I'm all about, and I don't have to have all these rules to make that work,
Right. It's the thing in World of War. Not to say that it was like World of Warcraft, because I don't think that comparison holds water.
No, it doesn't. I think it was a thing that people who were really, I don't know what you would call them, but
salty?
I guess salty, or I don't want to use the term gatekeeper, but definitely it was somebody who was like, hey, I don't like this because I like my thing and this is not my thing, so here's a term that I'm going to use to make it sound bad so other people will hop on board because it's easy to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree that is not the way to reference it.
But if you, I was never into World of Warcraft role playing. But if you were if you played on an RP server, you would create a character bound by these rules. Like you knew when you met a World of Warcraft character, oh, they're a warlock, they spec like this. And 4th edition did work that way. You are a commander and you took this spec. Okay, you should have some customization in the loadout and the abilities you focus on, but I can reasonably expect you to operate within these parameters. So that burden of I need to create my identity through the system is sort of off of you. So your World of Warcraft roleplay character, you pick your character, and then like it's all in the background that you do. It's all sort of extra system. It's outside of the system.
Oh, absolutely. I never really got into the whole. I played WoW for a little bit. I never got into the whole roleplay aspect of it. Mostly, I got sucked into WoW with the promise by other friends that I would eventually catch up to them and we would play together. And I eventually caught up to them, and then they stopped playing, and then I had the choice to keep playing or have a life, and I temporarily didn't have a life. Uh, which the best part was I was never actually that into WoW. I was never actually that good. I liked the prospect of journeying through this world. You know what I liked? I liked the prospect of playing D&D with people online. That was the prospect I had.
That was the dream.
What I should have done, what I should have done was just played 4th edition. That's what I should have done.
What years was that? That would have been like, was that high school for you, or was that like last year of high school? Or?
Yeah, WoW was high school. Yeah. I think that came out my junior year. I remember my buddy Steven, he got WoW back when you I think could only go to 4. I know that the first expansion had you to 60th level, but I feel like at the time there was some kind of cap. He got it really early on, and I remember I ended up making a human warrior when I was at his house, and I ran around killing boars for 2 hours, and I thought it was so cool.
Yeah, you did the classic experience. It was 04, 05. I remember, I always tell the same World of Warcraft story, but I'm going to because we're on the topic. It was winter of...
Oh, God, you and Nick, yeah.
Yep. It was winter of 05 or early 06. And my cousin, who plays Robert Livbringen in Descent into Avernus, my buddy Slugslayer, he came up to visit. I lived up in the mountains. It was snowing outside for winter break. We were both in high school. And we ate, and we slept, and we played World of Warcraft. I was a dwarven priest, and he was a paladin, I believe. We did nothing else for that whole week, and at the end of it, I was like, I can't do this, Nick. This will destroy me. This will eat me alive and consume me. I don't have the willpower. So I had to uninstall, and I barely ever went back. I went back a little bit, last year.
Didn't you keep some kind of an old 30-day trial CD in your drawer as a reminder?
At the time. At the time.
Okay. Yeah, you kept a 30-day trial CD as a reminder to never go back or something.
Through all 4 years of college, I had a 30-day free trial in my desk just to remind me how close destruction and oblivion were at all times because I had no willpower.
And the funny thing is, I mean, at the time I understood, but looking back on it, that's a lot like an alcoholic saying, I keep a handle of vodka in my drawer to remind me.
I want to ruin my life.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds dramatic, but it really doesn't hold up to scrutiny at all. NWC Tim posted a link to a homebrew Kerbal race for 5th edition.
What?
Yeah, Kerbals. Let's see.
You mean the space program?
Yeah, like Kerbal Space Program. Yeah. Let's see. They get +1 dex. They mature after 1 month, but no Kerbal has lived long enough for their lifespan to be determined. That checks out. And then
I'm already calling it. I feel like a Kerbal is just going to be a goblin gnome. That's what it seems like here.
They have permanent, unremovable spacesuits that serve as armor.
Okay, they're also Warforged. Okay.
They have jetpacks, so they can cast jump once per short rest. They have a bouncy head, so they can make a DC 20 acrobatics check to take no damage from a fall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is all from the game. They're photosynthetic, and they have disadvantage on charisma intimidation checks. I like that. And then their subraces are scientist, engineer, and pilot, which give you ability score boosts. And they give you proficiency in Arcana and the Identify spell if you're a scientist. Expertise and mending for engineers. And pilots get the ability Stupidly Brave. That's fantastic. I like it.
God, I remember when you and your brother were so into this game.
If I start playing KSP again, there's a lot of, some of my favorite games, the only reason I haven't gone back in is because I don't have a stable build with all my mods installed. I have an old build with old mods that won't boot. So if I wanted to go back into it, I'd have to uninstall everything, do my build order all over it, my load order all over again, and then go back in. But if I did that, like, you never hear from me again. If I started playing KSP or modded Skyrim or even modded XCOM, I love modded XCOM too. Like, if I do those, the content stream will stop.
God, I'm really glad that we never actually did the plan that we wanted to do with all of the. We originally were wanting to do D&D Skyrim, where we were like, oh man, I hope they come out with co-op someday, and then we'll just grab a cart, and then you and I will roll around as a couple of vampire hunters, just making that our life, and that's all we would do.
So if Skyrim music comes on when I've got just my ambient music going, I start getting like flashbacks and withdrawal symptoms. It's bad. It's really bad.
You know, I have the same problem with Skyrim. Not a problem. I'm going to put this out there. It's not bad at all. It's my problem. I have the same problem with Skyrim that I have with almost every other game that I've played, in that if I go down the side quest rabbit hole, I don't end up finishing the game because I end up wanting to finish every single quest I come across until eventually I've played for so long and my character is so jacked out that I could probably finish the game at almost any time, but I don't want to because I can't get past this one thing. And instead of just going, you know what, you can always come back to this, I get stuck on it and then I never go back to it.
It's that thing where if you leave the game for like a week or two, and the longer it is, the worse, right? You get to a point where you come back in and you load up and you're in the City of Solitude and you're like, what was I doing?
Yep.
And for some reason, even though you could literally just look at your quest journal and go decide to do something new, the fact that you can't remember what you were doing bothers you so much. It feels like trying to get back into something and you'd have to reread the whole book in order to figure out where you were in the middle of it. So then you might as well start over. So you might as well just not do it at all. Like,
so and then here's the next. This is actually the worst version. Is that you do everything you just said, but instead of not figuring out what you can do, you actually figure out right where you were, and you go back to the thing that you couldn't do, and now you've been gone for weeks or months or years.
And now you lost all your progress, and you can't remember.
Now you're even worse. And so then you go, oh, I remember why I gave this game up, and give it up again.
Yeah. Leaving the game at the start of a dungeon helps that. It gives you something to do right away while you remember. Yeah, that's really smart, actually. But yeah,
that's a really good idea.
I can't afford to get a stable Skyrim build on my computer. It would spell my ending.
Absolutely.
I know we made some other notes about errata. I think the only thing, there's only two. There's a lot of stuff in here, but I think there's only two things that I'd actually want to talk about on stream. Is there anything that you'd like actually want to bring up?
There's a couple. But no, I was just looking at something and it made me laugh. That's all.
Okay, so let's talk about the Lucky Feet.
Your notes are lovely, by the way.
Thank you.
I get joy not just from how well they're laid out, but I don't know. I just think about you saying it, and it becomes that much funnier.
All right. So,
Eric, can you prove a point for me? Can you just? I'm going to highlight something. Can you just, in your best like Joe voice, just say this verbatim?
Okay. Paladins can stack smites.
Like, whenever I see any of this stuff bullet pointed, that's all I hear, and it's amazing. It's almost like when you're going through a menu in a game, and it's just like, oh yeah, paladins can stack smite. Can they take reactions? No, they can't. You know,
it's like the codex entries in Mass Effect or whatever.
Yes, exactly.
That voice kicks in. What was the thing you were going to talk about?
What?
You had some errata things that you actually thought would be interesting to talk about on stream.
Oh, well, just, a couple that, stood out just from some of the things that you plucked out. I had a couple of my own, but a spell is a spell, no matter the source.
Okay, if we're going to talk about that, we need context, because that's a whole thing.
I mean, you were the betrayer in this one. I think it's only fair. No. So there was a game that pretty recently, for the most part, that
it was actually the first canonical campaign that officially took place in Anonymous.
So a little bit of backstory. Again, Joe and I have been playing this game together for probably about 15 years now, and we went from game to game, and a lot of them, would do the thing where it starts up, falls apart eventually, and it's a lot of fun up until then. But usually, again, like with every other game, it's all about scheduling and who can and can't show up.
In the course of the 15-ish years we've been playing this hobby, we've completed 2 campaigns.
Oh God. Well,
the two
okay.
Of us?
Yes, 2 campaigns and numerous one-shots, but yes,
but
definitely completed. We have had probably about 3 or 4 though that have lasted over a year.
Right, but they still died. Like they were
Yeah,
long form, but
absolutely.
we didn't conclude the story.
Yeah, and one of them was actually a pickup game that became way more than it ever was intended.
Yes. Yes.
But what I was getting at is that we did have a lot of pickup games because what we've kind of found is that no matter where we are in our lives, usually Joe and I make time for D&D, and we're the only one we can count on for that.
Yeah.
And so what ended up happening was that we've had a couple situations, especially in the most recent Anakra game, which actually it was called Gloriana by the name of the country that Joe came up with. And what we found out by looking through all this, we were like, hey, what if we took every single cool game that we ever made and just put it all in one world? Could that work? And so far, it looks pretty good.
It was in
Uh,
like the middle of the campaign too, because we were coming up
yeah,
with this campaign. It was going to be a dark fairy tale feel to it. Was the
and
idea?
it totally was way different than how you pitched it.
Yeah, it 100% did not end up being like a grim fairy tale story at all. The first adventure was on brand, right?
Oh yeah, I think the first few started out that way
Yeah,
for sure.
but then it sort of turned into epic fantasy.
You know, just like everything else in your games, I think once we went to Dotain's Rock, things kind of went on.
Yes, they did go to Dotain's Rock, but
As soon as we got to Burgundy, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
but yeah, so it was the final boss of the campaign that brought that thing up, right?
It happened a lot before then too, but yes, the big huge thing in the end, and again, this is what I was going to kind of touch on the whole working with your players on if you're planning on doing something, let your players know how that's going to play out. Like for instance, Joe has had this habit of when things are looking very, very grim, he will make it work so that way we don't just bulldoze his encounter. Because there's been way too many times where
God.
he'll pull out a really cool monster or trap or what have you, and somehow one of us, usually me, will find a way to ruin it. And it's no fun because it went from being this big, huge, cool thing into, oh, and now that encounter's over. Or Joe has a big, huge plan. Because again, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but Joe's a very big storyteller. And a lot of times you're just there so he can talk to you more about the cool story that he came up with.
That is not entirely fair or true.
No.
I'm a
I don't.
collaborator. I collaborate with my players.
Yes, you are a collaborator because we have trial and error to these amazing instances. No. Joe is amazing. Best DM I've ever played with. He's my
Thank you.
favorite. But we have had a few instances. One of the times I was on a boat and I needed to go into the depths of the underworld of the sea.
Oh,
and
this time. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun.
That's fair.
There's been certain instances that whether it's an event simulation or a monster, there should be a way based off of how things can be misconstrued that you could very easily get out of it. And that's not fun because usually there's a reason why that's happening. Anyways, the point we're trying to get to here with the spells is that Joe, at one part in the game, had a monster or a creature, a near god being that we fought, that was able to cast spells that weren't spells. And what I mean by that is that he would cast, let's just say, Misty Step. And one of the players that we played with had an ability to where they could make some kind of like a reaction or an attack when a spell was being cast. But oh, no, this is not a spell. This Misty Step is a special effect that, in all intents and purposes, acts like a spell, but it's not the actual spell, which again is totally legitimate. A DM has complete reign to be able to create effects like that, especially if you have a character who's been going around nuking all your spellcasters by doing a certain combo that maybe that character is not prepared to deal with. But it kind of got to the point where even things that were outright spells were just not spell effects. So the reason why that errata jumps out at me is that when you're casting Disintegrate, it's Disintegrate the spell no matter what it do, as long as you're calling it Disintegrate, in a way.
Right. Whereas I had some creatures that had a special ability, and the special ability was not Misty Step, but the text of the ability was basically Misty Step.
Yeah.
Because it was a special power, they couldn't counterspell it. They couldn't whatever.
They couldn't whatever it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so for me, go ahead.
No, finish first.
Oh no, I was just gonna say. So for me, I would say, for instance, like we had a player that had a special that was their whole thing. Was by the end of the game they were making themselves the anti-spell person.
Is this Minoru?
So no, this was Rawanel,
the
crazy
that's right.
paladin that just super busted everything.
Solo dragon.
Solo to drag. Well, yeah, because the heart of the cards and all that.
Yeah. Long story.
But I remember she had specifically taken this feat right before that final battle when we leveled up, just to make sure she'd be ready for this crazy magic god that we were about to face. And then when none of that worked, it was just it was an unfortunate occurrence, was all.
Yes. And honestly, like we've been playing together for so long that a lot of the unfortunate mistakes that I've made along the way that have made me a better dungeon master were at his expense. Um, Catching up with chat real quick, was it one of those completed campaigns, the one where the Gungan demo man went out guns blazing? Matt was not in that one. Slug Slayer from the other campaign. He plays Robert in Descent into Avernus. He was in that one. That campaign technically finished, but I don't count it because it finished
What
with
am I
players.
missing?
Okay, did you ever hear about the Star Wars the Star Wars campaign that I tried to run?
God, I feel like you had to have mentioned it.
Okay, I've told it on stream before, so I'll do a quick recap. It was with all my cousins, and I had the Star Wars D20 rulebook. So we wanted to play a Star Wars campaign. They wanted to play a Star Wars campaign. So we roll up some characters. It was the New Republic era, before, like, long before Disney came along, when the expanded universe was all still canon. And they make all these characters, and they won't stop being like, "Oh, I want a Star Destroyer. I want a Death Star. I want this. I want that." These days, if somebody asked me that, I'd be like, "Okay, that's what this campaign will be about." Right? I'd say, okay, we're Rogue Trader now. This adventure is you're on this Star Destroyer. Like, it's not just an item in your inventory that you can use to blow up people you don't like, but like this whole adventure is now about you getting one or you starting with one. But back in the day, I was like, you can't have a Star Destroyer. You're level 1. That's overpowered. Uh, Instead of finding some way to balance it. So they got annoyed. They got annoyed with being told no, and they got bored because they had no attention spans. So they decided to kill Luke Skywalker.
Okay, I definitely have heard this, but not in this way.
Yeah. So they got bored and they wanted to kill Luke Skywalker. So they go to Yavin 4, where the Jedi Temple was, where he was training all of his new Padawans. Uh, and they roll up and they're going to kill Luke. And I had his stats. Like, his stats were in the book. And they were level 1. And this was post Return of the Jedi, when he was an absolute boss.
Yeah.
So he just immediately hits him with a mind trick. You don't want to kill me. You want to go home and rethink your life. And they all fail their saves because they're level 1, right?
Yeah.
This boss, this main character hits them with a Jedi mind trick. They say, okay, they go home, they rethink their lives. And they say, you know what? We've rethought our lives. We're going to blow up the Senate. So they go to Coruscant.
Logically,
Yeah.
that's what you do when you can't kill Luke Skywalker.
Right? Well, because they were like, a better DM would have, one, not just stonewalled them at every turn. 2, read the room to see if they actually wanted to play this game. And 3, called it when it was clear they were bored and sabotaging it, unless they were actually having fun.
Absolutely. Now, again, to just jump in, being fair to yourself, I think that having a Star Destroyer at level 1 is a little bit of a that's an ask,
right,
for
but
sure.
You don't just hand it to them, right? You say you are the crew of a Star Destroyer, or you say, like, your first mission is going to start you on trying to get a Star Destroyer, but in reality, I'm not going to give it to you till you're level 5, but you'll be able to, like, make progress and,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right, you turn it into a thing, and you don't say no unless it's actually harmful. Like, adding a Star Destroyer to your character sheet at level 1 is harmful, but an adventure about stealing one is great. That's fun. That's good content.
Oh, absolutely.
TLDR, they go into the Senate with explosives. They all get sealed up in force fields and arrested. And the Gungan demolition expert just sets off all of the explosives on his person inside this force field. The force field contains most of the blast, but it launches one guard across the entire Senate chamber. The Gungan is vaporized. They all go to trial. They plead insanity. The judge is like, yeah, that checks out. And that's how that campaign ended.
Yeah. Was that through one game? Was that just one?
Yes.
Oh, well, I would call that a one-shot then, yeah.
It wasn't supposed to be a one-shot, is the thing.
No, it wasn't supposed to be,
Back then,
yeah.
we didn't do one-shots. We were always trying to start epic form campaigns
absolutely.
time. So,
absolutely.
So, and because of the way that ended, that was like player revolt, really.
Yeah.
I don't really count that one.
I mean, and again, but that's the fun thing, though, is as a DM, when you have that happen, whether it's a group you've been playing with for years or, your cousins that you see once every now and then, you're allowed to drop rocks on people when they get too frisky,
Right.
At least that was. I feel like that was the old way you did things. I feel like you said, nowadays you just got to work with people, and if you're not, if for some reason there's a disconnect, you should probably stop playing and then talk it out and figure it out. Just
Exactly.
because it's fun to threaten. I mean, I love whenever one of my guys gets frisky in my regular group, and I usually just look at him and he goes, "You gonna drop rocks on me?" I'm like, "Not yet."
I'm
You know, there,
thinking about it.
it's always fun to lightly threaten, DM Fiat, but I feel like if you get to the, it's almost kind of like when it comes to owning kids and not owning, having kids and
Oh
pets.
my.
If you have to get pretty vehement with the reprimanding, you probably shouldn't own that animal or have that child. You really need to figure things out without threatening your authority.
Right, that's your last resort.
Exactly, and only if it's bedtime.
Right, and I have the option of deciding to just not play with those people,
Oh, absolutely.
which is the other thing, right? Like if you
Absolutely.
have a party that's constantly trying to sabotage you and you don't enjoy, because some people make whole campaigns about like, you should hear some of the stuff that my friend Rich happened in his games. They never follow the main plot. They're always trying to like, uh, they go off the rails and they start a mail order service and they have like, they get a bunch of kobolds and convert them to communism, or they invent telemarketing. Like every single one of their campaigns, the campaigns I've run on the channel have gone wildly off the rails, and they've often been very goofy and very funny, but there's still a story, right?
Oh, in the best of ways,
Right,
yeah.
it's everyone's still trying to do the fantasy thing, even if they're being very funny and comical about it. They're not breaking the fourth wall. They're not like sabotaging the story. They're still, the story doesn't turn out the way that I imagined it, but there is still a story happening, as opposed to
Oh,
just being
absolutely.
completely, batshit crazy.
Like the group that decides to go start a liquor company instead of taking on the lich.
Right.
I mean, that makes for great memes. But
Yeah.
if you were planning on having a really badass epic campaign and then weekly you're just meeting up to do taxes, that's not fun.
But and it's all about expectations. For one group, communist kobold uprising is great content. Uh,
I did not think we were going to be saying communist kobold uprising more than once ever, and now it's happened several times.
well, there you go. But like I said, I'm the kind of DM who does not include silliness in my campaigns because I know the players will provide me with the goofiness. I don't need to
Oh,
add. If I add
God.
it, it's just going to go completely like, it'll be a catalyst and the whole thing will explode. Goofiness is inevitable.
No, you're right. That's probably the issue that I have. Is I really lean way towards the goofy.
You really? No. I mean, but why is it? Is it an actual issue in your campaign? I know your campaign takes a long time to get anywhere, but everyone's like, except for,
No, they have a blast.
yeah,
Yeah.
like if the content is good, if your players are engaged and enjoying it, they're not just deadlocked over what to buy or what door to go through. Like if they're wasting all their time on a side character, that's not wasted. They're having fun as long as everyone is into that.
Yeah, I just never expected a half-orc pickle salesman to be anywhere near as important as he's become. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Like the half orc pickle salesman is great, and the players, oh, the fate of the world is at stake, and they're like, yeah, that's great. What about the half orc pickle salesman? Are his sales
Dude,
doing well?
absolutely. You know how much gold they've put into that guy? I can't even believe it. It's so funny, and that's the thing about D&D versus real life. I mean, I've got some really good friends, but even if I'm doing well, I don't just throw my money at my friends saying, "Here, whatever thing you're into, you go forth." Now, maybe I should be doing that. Maybe that's the
Well,
way to live.
no. Here's the thing, right? Is if you first off, the economics of D&D make no sense, but a player character with 10 gold is rich.
Oh yeah.
Like, and there is also like, if you support your friend's art and subscribe to their Twitch channels and stuff like that, that's kind of the equivalent.
Oh yeah.
But
Definitely.
when a player character hauls off a dragon horde and is like, oh, what happened in Descent into Avernus? Somebody gave a beggar like 10 gold at the gate. I think Umberto did that. He gave a beggar
Yeah.
like 10 gold.
We've had a few instances where we've kind of thrown around gold at people in a bad part.
Right, and it's like, okay, silver, 1 gold piece, that's a lot. You give somebody 10 gold, and holy crap, he just paid for like a month's rent.
Oh yeah.
At least, if not more.
Oh yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
a huge amount. So when player characters are throwing money at the pickle salesman guy, like, they have money to burn. They're in a position where, like, if you won the lottery, you would throw money at your friends.
Oh yeah. No,
Right?
you're right. You're right. I mean, if I killed the dragon and got 10 Yeah.
Yeah. So I think
That
it's
is
more
very
along
true.
those lines.
Just really quick, I'll just touch on what some guy was asking about. The half-war pickle salesman. I mean, anybody who has gone through the Prince of Apocalypse. Oh, are we still on?
Yeah, we're still here.
Oh, good. Yeah, there is a NPC named Grund in the Princes of Apocalypse, and I won't get too into it because I don't know how many people want to play that. But he is a throwaway side character that you meet in the first town, and there's some stuff that happens, and he may end up being someone that you interact with a lot, and he may not be. He was not intended to actually be anyone of consequence. However, once I put on this really I'm a bit of a dumb bloke, but I mean well. I kind of got tricked into what I was doing, and oh man, but you should go find some pickles. I'll have this really nice little patch. And so by giving him a funny voice and making him kind of, I have this thing. Here's the thing. I kind of do this a little too much. I think in most of my games, I try to turn even the smallest little choice in the game into a moral consequence. It's kind of like, hey, somebody may have wronged you and you have the choice of either forgiving them or dealing with them any way that you see fit. However, just be aware they only did this thing because they have no parents and their mother was an alcoholic and their sister died in a fire. And I'll usually layer on, again, that's a bit of an overstatement, but I'll usually kind of make it to where bad guys in my games usually aren't just bad guys. There's usually a reason why they did what they did. And usually, if a character is just a bastard, people will just kill him without a second thought. But if you even add in one little bit of something that makes people question, wait, is this person really so bad? Did they really mean to have it out for me, or could they have been tricked, or is there a way that I can try and help them? And when you do that, it makes people a lot more interested in, wait, maybe I want to help this person. And when your weird half-orc pickle salesman, is dumb as rocks and has a funny accent, it seems like people want to just throw money at them and make sure that their pickle empire turns into a astounding piece of commerce. So I actually have another one-off campaign that I'm doing whenever we can't get the whole group together for my current one. One of the characters approached me and said, I want to play this guy. I actually want to make a character that is not just is like him. I want to be Grun the pickle salesman in this game. And I'm like, dude, you know what? More power to you. Go for it. Let's make it happen. But again, it's nobody that I came up with. He's just someone that the game threw at you and said, here's a guy with a name and a one shot, task that he needs to complete. And he's supposed to just be you could kill this guy and no one would care. But the party cared, and now he's the most important character in the game.
Aside from the kid.
Yes, aside from the 10-year-old boy who has now Arya Starked his way into the party's heart.
But honestly, in regards to that, for folks who have watched Arc 1 of Casters and Castles where Bren was DMing, Matt's DMing style is a lot closer to Bren's insofar as Matt's a great character actor. He does I barely do voices. I don't usually do voices. I do a lot of I'll mix first person actually saying the character's dialogue with this third person of they look at you and they wonder what you're doing here. Whereas Matt is a lot better at slipping into character, doing voices, and that whole every person is a person and they made their choices for a reason. In Arc 1, Bren would, every single time they killed anybody, Bren would suddenly make it tragic. He'd bring them to life for a moment, have them say, call out for their mother or say, I'm sorry, I failed you, and really made the PCs feel bad about everyone they killed, let alone the Frag the Kid incident. That was egregious and blatant, but there's a lot of that excellent character acting that comes to the foreground in Matt's games, much like in Bren's.
Yeah, you make a good point. I never really thought about it because I kind of, you are a master narrator, and your settings always have
but
an
I
error.
Narrate, right? That's the difference.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, I don't think I don't have the panache for that. I've tried the description thing and I can do a pretty good job. For me, I do better when I write notes ahead of time and I sit there and I basically, when they get to an area, I can look at my notes and kind of just barely cover them just to get a sense of what's going on there. I'm trying to get better at that. The joke I was going to make was that I feel like and again, nothing, I think Brent is an excellent DM. I think that, like you said, though, much like with his character acting, people or DMs similar to us who don't have a air for the narration like you do have to throw in the dramatic, and more so there's no better way to make people feel bad about killing somebody than to cry out for their mother, or to lament about never going to college or something.
Well, it was great because they were fighting like just this town militia that thought they were vagabonds, and they started fragging all of them. And he was like, "Yeah, these aren't hardened soldiers; they're peasants with spears." And
Oh yeah,
he did a great
absolutely.
job of playing it up.
I mean, if you don't make your players feel bad for the choices they made, are you really doing your job?
Oh man. I think I'm ready to drop the pretense of trying to talk about the errata. There are a couple of other points, but like honestly, do you want to take a look at the Chandler or the Master Thrower?
Let's jump into the Master Thrower, just because that one is far more completed. Then I mean, right now we're kind of in a few different versions of the channeler, and I think we're narrowing it down. More so when we get to that, I do want to talk about just the flavor of it. I
Yeah.
think that's going to be really interesting.
Right, because that's the thing. The Master Thrower is designed. It's an idea from an older edition that Matt has done most. I've consulted. I've helped. We go back and forth, leaving notes about specific rule language, and that seems overpowered. Blah blah blah. But the Master Thrower is really something that Matt has brought to life, and it's something that could exist in any world in any game. It's.
Oh,
Do
absolutely.
you want to talk about like your design perspective, what role you see it fulfilling as opposed to the other rogue subclasses?
Yeah, I think first of all, just going into it, I right now I'm working on actually quite a few subclasses that really take a lot of the old third edition and kind of bringing them, because really I think a lot of the prestige classes port into subclasses very well. I think
Yeah,
that's probably exactly where it came from.
and with all the splat books that came out for third edition, I had over, I want to say, 200 prestige classes in my
Oh,
collection. Like
yeah,
the options
easily.
were wild.
And honestly, there are so many more that I want to make, and I'm even when I'm 90 and can't even think, I'm probably still going to be tooling around with making subclasses. I think it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Uh, but specifically, I think the reason why the master I latched onto that one so intensely was that in fifth edition, there's a lot of there's a lot less rules than there was for previous editions in the game. But the rules, of course, that they do have are very specific about the kind of things that you can do. And I feel like in fifth edition, thrown weapons kind of got the yeah, it's let's just say this: grappling went from being "I'll never do this" to where it's actually pretty darn good. And that's debatable. Some people think oh, grappling, whatever, but I like it a lot. I think it's a lot of fun in fifth edition. But almost unless you find a throwing weapon and you're like, oh, cool, this will come back to me. I don't
Like
have
an
to worry about it.
enchanted returning throwing weapon,
Yes,
right?
if
Yeah.
if you find a dwarven thrower or some kind, if you have the your axle bracers where you can throw magic daggers out and they just instantly revive, those are great. But most people won't opt to just throw their dagger. Yeah, sometimes it happens, and it definitely isn't like someone's kit. Whereas if you think about it in stories or media, there's tons of characters where even if that's not their whole thing, you'll see a guy who's covered in bandoliers full of throwing knives and axes and things, and they'll run around whether they're a main martial fighter or that's their shtick. Especially like back in the old Conan movies, you'll have like these warriors that are barbarians and fighters rolling around with sword and board or with great swords and axes and whatnot. But you'll usually have this like lithe, roguish kind of guy who will carry on a bunch of daggers, and whenever he's not slitting throats, he's usually throwing them at people to great efficiency. They drop down and they die. However, if you try to throw a dagger at someone in D&D 5th edition, you're mostly just getting rid of your weapon.
Right, unless like literally the only viable build I can think of without first off, you'd have to play a rogue. So it makes sense that you're
Yes,
making the Master Thrower a
exactly.
rogue, but like without sneak attack damage, throwing a weapon, if you do a d4 of damage, you're wasting your life.
Well, and even then, if you're gonna make a ranged rogue, you might as well go full board into it. Take a short bow or
Yeah.
other kind, or some kind of crossbow rogue. Get one of the associated feats that goes with it to make you nuts, and just do that. There's almost no reason. Again, the biggest flavor reason, which is why I think the Master Thrower would be such a fun thing to work with, is that if you're doing that game where it's very urban and you're not going to be rolling around in dungeons where you have to use subterfuge and you have to be very sneaky. If you're rolling around into town carrying a short bow, people are going to know about it, and you've now given away the ghost in terms of an assassination or even just protecting people. But if you have a bunch of daggers or throwing knives hidden around your body, you might just look like a regular dude, and then out of nowhere, you are a fully capable rogue in essence. So that's the thing that I was really trying to
It,
yes.
We need a counter for
Absolutely.
how many times people have referenced sideshow, throwing, etc.
I,
for the master
Again,
thrower.
again 10 years ago or more, this really wasn't as much of an issue because, throwing wasn't as prevalent back
It
then.
wasn't as much part of
Uh,
the parlance.
exactly, or at least widely, it's now it's the thing now. But so that name might have to change. That's the biggest takeaway I'm getting even before we start really on this. But that was where I was going with this. The Here, let's if you wanted to hop into the you're already on there.
Yep.
Perfect. Uh, the big thing that I was really going for, because you know how every class gets like a little splat about like what its intention is. And really, like I was just kind of going over, the biggest thing I was going for is that if you're a rogue that wants to, and you're again, if you're playing in the right kind of campaign where this works out for you, this would be something that again would be an alternate assassin. Again, not an assassin that I'm going to be standing up on the rooftop waiting for somebody to get in my field of vision so I can jump down from the roof and slam down into them. Very Assassin's Creed style, or if I'm going to try and poison someone or snipe them from a distance. There's all kinds of different assassin type or just the assassin subclass itself that can do this. But this is more so somebody who is like a bodyguard, someone who's going to be walking around guarding a noble and wants to make sure that they're not making a big scene about like, oh yeah, I've got a big old sword and wearing full armor. The master thrower is somebody that can be a little more low key and be fully capable with their class. Again, I kind of feel like if you're playing a master thrower, you're likely not going to be like tit for tat. You're not going to be quite nearly as flashy per se, or have a specific set of skills like other rogues might. You're very focused. Your whole thing is basically throwing daggers, and I'd like to extend it out into, again, my original idea for it was you could throw axes, you could throw daggers, you could throw spears. But really, making it a rogue, you're kind of pigeonholed it into throwing darts and throwing daggers. That's really where you can throw other things. You're just not going to get sneak attack. Uh, but the big thing that I want to push for it is that it's taken by nobles who see it as like kind of like a fun, like it's a sporting thing. Like, oh yes, look at me, I can stand from 20 paces back and throw this dagger into that target. So from that aspect of it, if you want to have an NPC that may take it, that's kind of where you can go with it. But for the most part, I'm seeing it as if you want to be hyper specialized in this very underutilized part of 5th edition's rule system, this is a way to make it feel usable without just being kind of a waste of time. You know how, like we were saying, mate, if you come across something that could break the game, as long as your intention is to just do it for either flavor or for fun, it's kind of good for it. I had tried a lot of builds in 5th edition to make a master thrower, to make someone who just throws weapons, and it really is just wasting your gold, because unless you go
Yeah.
around with arrow, I mean, if you buck, you spend a gold on 20 arrows, you're going to probably recover half of them. There's not situations where you can always get them back, but again, you've thrown 1 gold at it. Whereas if each dagger, I think a dagger costs what, 2 gold or
It's
something
one
like
or
that,
two
maybe
gold, I
5
want
gold.
to say.
But if that's per attack and you can't go pick that up or whatnot, you're basically just literally throwing money at people to do less damage than you could by just shooting them with a bow.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there's a certain part of it that you need to kind of make it worth enough to risk that. And also just bring a lot of fun flavor to the class. Again, one of the things I was trying to do was add in some cool ribbons, like the Deceptive Showman, in order to kind of make it to where you can put on knife shows and things like that. Again, fun stuff that comes up that either when you're on downtime or if you're just in town and people are splitting off to do things, you can just go, oh yeah, my guy goes and he just sets up a bunch of targets and begins performing.
Or
And it gives you
juggling
something that,
knives and stuff like that.
yeah, exactly. And it gives you something, it gives you a skill that you can utilize, performance, that isn't actually, you can't abuse that for an in combat bonus. You're never going to say, hey, Joe, I want to perform in front of this guy and get like advantage on, I mean, that's not going to fly. Again, there might be certain ways where you might get a little with it, but it's not like giving them like stealth or something. It's not giving them a
Right.
skill that actually is a huge mechanical bonus. It's mostly just flavoring.
And, D&D is sort of built around the idea of the 3 pillars of exploration, combat, and role-playing. So when you're building out a subclass, not only does it have to have its own interesting identity of, an Oath of Vengeance paladin fulfills a different role of the armored crusader than an Oath of Protection paladin does. They both sort of have these archetypes, but they're also going to interact with the world in different ways, and their abilities will not just be about fragging nerds. They're going to have what are called ribbons, which are these extra abilities that don't really change their combat balance, but give them more of a place in the world, give them some more options for exploration and roleplay, give them a sense of identity. So I do think the comparison to a classic ninja from chat, you could absolutely skin a master thrower as a ninja with some of these abilities. Matt, why don't you talk about sort of the core features of the master thrower and how that works? Just an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're exactly right. Really, you probably could just reskin this as a ninja, and it would be very, very similar for what we're going for.
Just with no jutsus, which you'd want to be like the
Absolutely.
shadow monk.
Oh yeah, no, totally. Because again, one of the ways that back in the day we used to, like I was saying in chat, call them ninja master throwers. You just played a rogue that proceeds into master thrower. It was all right, but when you tacked on the stuff you got from being a ninja is when things got really fun.
Yeah, because they had a ninja class.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the thing. Really, I might want to move into actually just going that route with it. Again, I feel like Master Thrower doesn't. I feel like when you talk about a ninja, it gives people a very specific frame of mind that I wasn't initially going for with this. But anyways, the big so every subclass, like you were saying, it has like a big standout thing that makes it work. Like whenever you're picking a subclass, you're either getting a lot of general stuff, like with the rogue thief. You're instead of being the assassin that you're so good at assassinating and you're very good at disguises, the thief makes it to where they're just extremely good about moving around the world. Again, you can use their stuff inside of combat, outside of combat. Whether it touches on the three tiers of play, like you were saying. Whereas an assassin basically is combat. Yeah, you can do some of that for the social aspect of the game, but really, what I'm going for with the Master Thrower is kind of making a very hyper specialized rogue that really focuses on combat with throwing daggers or throwing weapons in general.
But unlike the assassin who focuses on massive burst damage and stealth, the master thrower is more of a combat utility with damage,
Exactly.
but a heavy focus on utility.
Yeah, exactly. Because with an assassin, if you have missed your sudden time to do it at right at the beginning of combat, you're kind of not getting your class. Really, if you're playing an assassin in this game, you kind of have to be the rogue that everyone hates. You got to be 20 to 30 feet ahead of the party. You're the one who's always getting into danger before everyone else, or you're kind of stopping the fun. You are going around soloing every single enemy they come across until eventually it stops working, and then the rest of the players can join in the fray. And even though that's great fun for the assassin, it's not a lot of fun for the players. So a master thrower, at least in my humble opinion, is more of a team player in that regard, rather than blowing their whole load as it would be on one big super cool ability. They borrow with the cunning artifice ability what the battle master fighter does. They parse out their fun stuff, sprinkle it throughout the combat. Rather than doing everything all at once, they're limited to doing they get these things called their throw tricks, to where every single turn they are able to utilize one of their tricks. And so when you're making an attack, you can select from, just like the maneuvers that a battle master has, you have trick throws. And there's different effects that you can do. They're usually broken down into something that happens when you attack, something that happens once you've hit, or something that's a little more general. And so again, they really try to set up openings among the enemies for your allies or for themselves. They try and take advantage of certain conditions, much like either like some kind of blindness or stunning. They do things to affect the battle for a very short amount of time in order to either make it easier for them to get around an enemy or for the whole party to kind of come in and stop what's happening there for the most part.
So they have a pool of cunning dice, which is what power these throws. They're limited and they recharge on a short rest, and usually use one of these trick throws in combat. You add the result of the dice roll, again, like a battle master's pool of, what are they called? Tactic dice?
Superiority dice.
Superiority dice. You get to, I'm doing a special thing where I'm adding a little extra damage to this attack, and it's also going to cut their movement in half next round, or disarm them, or give them disadvantage. And one of the things.
Yeah. So for instance, you'd be able to, as one of your trick throws, let's say that you and your group are trying to sneak into a heap. There's a guard on duty, but he's a little bit distracted. He's not quite maybe as vigilant as he could be. You could choose to do something like a distracting throw. Whereas when you make the attack against them, you can attempt to distract them by making it to where, again, they have to make a save, wisdom versus your trick throw save DC. And if you are able to get this off on them, then it basically just makes it to where, God, I'm getting all distracted here now.
all good. I've got it pulled up right here. It's on page. I don't know.
Oh, I was looking at the wrong one. So distracting. I was looking for disorienting strike.
Yeah.
If in the guard scenario, what you're looking at here is that you can make it to where they have disadvantage on their next attack roll or a wisdom perception check. So what you're looking at here is if, for instance, you're trying to get past a guard and you feel like, oh yeah, we're a really stealthy party, but we're kind of out in the open, and if we go into view, this guy's very likely going to see us. However, if you can do this distracting strike, you're basically throwing your dagger, but instead of like trying to kill him with it, you kind of swing it to where it hits the pommel right in his forehead, and he's kind of dazed for a second. So either in combat, you're using it to make sure that his next attack isn't going to be as effective against you, or if you're looking for more so an out of combat thing, it makes it to where his next perception check. Now, again, this wouldn't be like all perception checks, I believe. I think it's just
Red
one.
is written right now. It's next attack and all wisdom perception checks until the end of their next turn.
I think we've been playing with that. I think that's one of the things that's one of the with the playtesting.
Yeah.
Exactly, it's pocket sand basically. What we're trying to look for is to, again, part of it is balancing a lot of this out. We're trying to figure out, again, as we play through this, what we're going to be doing. But effectively, for a short amount of time, they either aren't as good at noticing you or not as good at attacking you. And most of the abilities in here, much like the Battle Master, do the same thing. The big difference between a Battle Master fighter and a Master Thrower rogue is that you're going to be doing less damage, not just because you're using a D4 weapon instead of likely a D8 weapon, but the Cunning Dice itself only deals a D6 instead of a D8. So the point is with this one not to be stepping on the toes of the Battle Master fighter by saying, hey, look, I'm a rogue that got Battle Master but didn't multiclass into it. These are specific to thrown weapons. They do less damage, and they, for the most part, there are some effects that double over, but these are a lot more geared towards not being like that battlefield commander and more so being that really tricky rogue that is trying to get the one over on the opponent.
And they're sort of divided into abilities that help your allies in combat. For example, if you hit somebody with something that makes them vulnerable to attacks, it doesn't really matter that much if it ends at the end of their next turn because you're not going to get another attack, but your ally would. So some of these are more like support powers, and some of these are, if you're running a Master Thrower who does a lot of solo infiltration missions, you pick different tricks.
Absolutely. Like, for instance, like with the staggering strike, when you hit a creature until the beginning of its next turn, it's going to be stunned. So if you're going to be trying to get the one over in this guy, it's not like a monk running up and punching this guy and for a whole turn they can't do anything. They're only stunned until they can act. So it kind of gives everyone a moment of being able to either get by this guy or you have to work with your allies in order to get the drop on this guy before he comes to his senses.
I like the new version of Nimble Scoundrel. So at 3rd level, anytime that you...
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd seen that. He was experimenting with an ability where you could use a bonus action to dodge. It was pretty goddamn good. It was,
yeah, no, and the reason why is that originally, a monk can do that, but a monk also spends a resource that, especially at lower levels, is very, very, very few and far between. Part. Whereas
you spend a key point as a monk to do that, right?
Exactly. So what we would have wanted to do for that was that you have to use we would have had to have made it a throw effectively by having you spend one of your resources to do it. But this I actually think feels a lot better in general.
Yeah. So to read out the text to you, chat, whenever you use one of these cunning abilities, like whenever you spend one of your cunning dice on one of these special throws, the next attack against you until the beginning of your next turn has disadvantage. So it's not dodge where it gives everyone who tries to hit you has disadvantage, but one attack against you every time you spend one of your resources gets disadvantage. That feels really good.
So yeah, I think what we're going for with the Master Thrower is that it doesn't do any one thing, even though it's very specialized in what it's trying to go for. It doesn't do what it does better than anybody else, but it gets a few more of these options in relation to these thrown weapons. Also, for instance, along with the Nimble Scoundrel, you're able to draw and stow up to 2 thrown weapons instead of only 1. And again, this whole kit specializes thrown weapons in every regard. Because again, if looking at it by that, if it was just weapons, someone might go, "Oh, I'll just dip in the Nimble Scoundrel, and now I can, pick up the." Being able to grab 2 weapons instead of having to take the 2 inviting feat. Now, I don't know why you wouldn't do that in the first place, but again, we're always looking for things to where you're not going to find someone. Unintended breaks in the game. Yeah, you want to set it up to where it does specifically what it's trying to do.
Yeah.
I've specifically been spending a huge amount of time with the language of this, trying to make sure that this sticks. Again, kind of like you were saying, mate, one of the things that we're trying to do with the subclasses is uh, making them as fun and fair as possible without being just something that's carbon copied from fifth edition. A lot of times when people are looking for extra subclasses, they want something fun and original. My only issue with a lot of homebrew that we normally see is that it gets a little dicey. Sometimes people play really loosey goosey with the rules, and not only will it be a little bit, I think, uh,
Tuned.
overtuned, yes, but likewise, a lot of times people are just saying what they're thinking about the ability, and it isn't verbatim how you would normally read it in fifth edition. So sometimes it can be a little confusing what people are trying to say. And really, with any subclass that we're working on, I'm trying to make it very, very important. That it's very, very specific.
Essentially to follow the fifth edition style guide and language, so that it's very clear how these abilities function. There aren't weird, blurry, fringe cases, so on and so forth. So that it's got the level of polish you would expect from something in Xanathar's guide.
Exactly.
Cool. It has some of its ribbons include the ability to do like knife juggling and performances. Anything that involves thrown weapons, you get expertise. You can hypnotize people by juggling knives and such. Then later on, some of your capstones, you crit on a 19 or a 20, only with thrown weapons, which I think only the champion gets that otherwise, right?
I believe there are others. I know it might be weapons that get that, certain magic weapons, but yeah, I think that's a no. I think as more subclasses have come out, they've been adding that to more and more things. But it's not the champion. I believe is the only one that gets a straight. This goes to a 19. This goes to an 18. I believe other subclasses, and I would have to look at specific ones. But I think it reads when you do a certain thing, then that's when you get this.
So some guy asks about the alchemist build for a master thrower.
We've talked about that. Actually, it's really funny because a lot of my players, well, not there's a few players rather in my recent game that are trying to make Molotov cocktails. They whenever they go anywhere, they ask how much alcohol. They try and do the whole thing where they collect alcohol and wicks. And I've been trying to tell them that alcohol and wick does not a Molotov cocktail make. There's a little more that goes into it than that we can't talk about on stream.
Without getting visited by the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes, exactly. But I mean, it's technically possible. But again, I think a lot of times, unless it's there are rules for it. I mean, you can go into the DMG and there's futuristic weapons that you can find to kind of simulate what they're going for. And I have someone in my game who's playtesting the Master Thrower for me. And a lot of these tweaks that we make are because of things that we find out during these games. But I have, yeah, no, I absolutely, we definitely want to make sure that we can start putting this out there. I do want to get a lot more feedback from people as to how they can interpret this subclass and make it work and see what things are working, what things are breakable. But when it comes to, I think the weird place we get into is what would be the difference per se between throwing a jar of toxic substances and throwing a hand axe? Because really, is a jar of toxic substances a thrown weapon? And if you look into the weapons section of the 5th edition equipment, you're not going to find a jar of toxic substances.
Right. I don't
However,
know that the text says it is a weapon attack.
but the thing though is that you could easily look at alchemist fire. I would say that toxic substances, looking at acid or alchemist fire, that would be, I think, a very easy crossover. You know what I mean?
Honestly,
But if we take a look,
no, you go first. Finish up.
Oh no, I was just going to say, but if you take a look at the adventuring gear, that is where Alchemist Fire does pop up. And I think at that point, you're looking at DM Fiat because nothing in the section talking about Alchemist Fire, it talks about how you could throw it, but it's not a thrown weapon. And I think we're looking at the same territory that whenever people ask Jeremy Crawford about unarmed attacks, that's just what it is. Whenever you're using your fist and you're not a monk, it's an unarmed attack. It's not a weapon. These are not registered weapons unless the actual attack says it's a weapon. So I think that would be the same thing with a jar of toxic substances. I feel like if this were ever to become a real class, which would be hilarious, but in rules as written, no, you wouldn't be able to gain the benefits of trick throws that you would get from a, like, let's say, dagger or dart that you could do with a jar of toxic substances. However, I think that with your DM, you would be able to probably work something out, or more than likely, I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot of ways. Like, for instance, if you take a look at the trick throw ricochet, people would see that as like, oh, you got a shuriken, you bounce a shuriken off a wall, kind of like Captain America. However, I think really we all know if Captain America threw a shield at a wall, it would just hit the wall, uh, and it wouldn't bounce several times to hit a few bad guys.
Well,
But I mean,
it's
this is
vibranium, man.
it's vibranium. This is the rule of cool. This is D&D. Things work a little bit differently, in these parts. And if you were to throw a jar of alchemist fire and try to use ricochet throw, it's just gonna shatter on the wall, unless you're so good that you throw it and it hits the cork in the right spot to where it gives that bounce you're looking for. But even then, I feel like if you're throwing alchemist fire or a jar of toxic substances, you're probably going to be able to arc that sucker to where if you're because really all ricochet throws makes it to where you could try to hit someone behind cover. And I feel like if you have a jar of toxic substances, it's likely going to get there anyway if you quote unquote would hit the armor class. So I don't think you really need something like that. But again, I think for something like tumbling throw is that when you throw a weapon and you're able to tumble away from danger, I don't see why a DM would not allow you to throw a jar of anything at someone and not be able to utilize that feature. It kind of just comes into the whole, hey, Joe, does this sound good? And Joe says, oh, you're not trying to break the game. Yeah, this works for me. This sounds great. Whereas if I go, oh, good, now that means I can, and then Joe goes, whoa, 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 hold up, cowboy. You didn't give me your butt. You didn't give me your, and then I need to hear the whole thing.
Give me your butt.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that if this was ever, say, released for Adventurers League play, in an Adventurers League game, the answer is no. It has to be a weapon attack, and those aren't weapon attacks. So it would 100% be in DM Fiat territory. If you want to play a character who specializes in throwing nasty goo at people, there are a couple alchemist classes out there in the wild. And I would say a character...
Or you can ask Joe's brother. That's another good way
to
do that.
Also true. But I think that the way I would handle it is if somebody had a specific character in mind and they multi-classed into an alchemist class that specializes in throwing potions and bombs and stuff, and they multi-classed into master thrower, at that point you're what, level 5, level 7, and you have spec'd for this, like this is your whole character image. That's the sort of thing I tend to go along with. Because you're not just trying to cheese the system, you have this idea for your character and you need to make it work. BRB, drafting a beggar who throws jars of piss at the rich. Oh
I mean, you could also just roll an Australian sniper. That works as well.
Also true. Also true. They get that as a class feature.
Exactly.
All right. Any other comments on the Master Thrower? We might put out a draft version of it at some point.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, really, the big thing, I think we've already kind of covered everything into it. One of the things that I was trying to do is make sure that it has some fun combat options that can be utilized either outside or adjacent to actual encounters. They get some fun ribbons that make it to where when you're not doing your thing in a fight, you can still feel like you're doing your thing. And then you get, again, like we said, the three pillars of play. Even though there's really not a way to put an exploration ability under this class, we do have a few social options like with mesmerizing display and with the deceptive showman where you're able to do some things outside of game. And really, again, this just hyper specializes into thrown weapons. So if that's something that's interesting to anybody, then this I think would be very appealing. My only thing that I'm a little worried about with it is I feel like depending on how some of the abilities with the trick throws are written, there's some pretty funky things that you can do with the superiority dice feature of the trick throw cunning dice, where it can feel a little powerful at times just because you could just take, over the course of 4 turns, you're popping out all these abilities and doing a bunch of extra damage. So I feel like over time, depending on what kind of feedback we might be able to get either from players actually doing it or people in the community who take a crack at it, we might want to tune the damage down a little bit just because even though they're just D6s, and that's on top of a weapon that does D4, again, rogues are prone to their sneak attack and critting, and that can get a little silly over times. But I think, for instance, something like lingering attack, I think the verbiage where you're only dealing half of like the initial damage, even if you happen to get some big crazy crit off, it's never going to be like you just used a feature to crit twice. There's things like that that are in place that are trying to help with that. But I mean, I think we've mostly gone through, the big thing about what makes this class what it is. I think over time, the only thing that I would be for Joe to put his magic talkie language into the opening line about it. But for the most part, I really see it as people who want to either be sportsmen, bodyguards, or hired killers, are who are going to be kind of drawn to this.
I agree.
I also feel like it likely, depending on your campaign setting, would be a regional thing. You wouldn't see master throwers hanging out everywhere. It would likely be something that came up either through a certain culture of people that this was the thing that they were able to do and they perfected it and it kind of got around. Uh, or again, like back in third edition, master throwers kind of formed like a guild of sorts. They were very few and far between, and whenever they would meet, they would share their different tricks and kind of come up with different ways to do things. So there's ways that you can kind of add it to the world and make it feel a lot more natural, which is the stuff that I leave to Joe. I just try to work on the nitty gritty of it.
The thing about the Master Thrower is that as a concept, it casts a wide net. You could build Bullseye from comics, with an extreme version of this. So I think that keeping the lore fairly broad is a good approach here. And as
Absolutely.
for how it's gone in testing in Descent into Avernus, which I wish we could play more often, but
Yeah.
most of the people in that campaign are dads, and there's a lot of scheduling concerns there. We are still working on it, though. I don't think I've had any real problems with the class as a DM. I think there was a period where you were able to dodge as a bonus action. I don't know if you ever. Yeah, that happened.
We did.
Right?
No, that was it happened with the Carrion Crawler when I finally was
Yes.
able to use this class, and you didn't say no during it, but you definitely had concerns, and that was what led you and I to changing it. And we've only gotten in a few real fights since then because it's mostly been either something too big for us to encounter and we had to run, or something we just completely stomped anyway.
Or skullduggery.
Yes, or skullduggery. But I have so not felt. I don't feel guilty by using this homebrewed class in our game so far. I can say that.
And I don't think that it's harming my ability to challenge the party. I really think but dodge as a bonus action was the only thing that didn't feel good. Everything else, it mostly just feels cool. Like when the opportunity comes up, it doesn't feel overpowered. It doesn't feel like it's nerfing all of my bad guys. It just feels like cool utility.
The one thing that I love about it thematically is the idea that after this really badass knife thrower, and especially we see this in movies where you'll have someone like Bullseye or any character that has any form of finesse that throws their stuff around, and then they just leave the scene, and you don't see just piles of daggers just lying around the room. And I love this idea of this Peter Parker-like rogue that goes around just scooping up all their daggers and throwing stars at the end of an encounter.
Everyone's dead, but instead of being able to walk off like a badass, they're like, okay, hold on, let me just... Sorry,
like most rogues.
The wall.
Yeah, like most rogues, once the fighting's over, they go like, okay, I loot this body, and then the master's like, oh yeah, I go collect all my stuff afterwards.
Cool. Let's talk for a bit about the Channeler.
Oh man. I always get really
This subclass should be renamed Batman. Yes.
No, that's the joke we make during stream all the time, is that literally it's just Zorro without a rapier and Batman.
Well, it doesn't help that you literally picked the Batman background.
Well, you showed me the Batman background and it was perfect.
I think it's
But yeah, had I not gone with that, I think the close comparison would not be there quite as much. So yeah, jumping over to the Channeler, this has been something that I feel like for you and me, mate, especially since we've really made Anakra a thing that we're really pushing a lot of our time and energy into, I feel like we've been Channeler adjacent for a long time.
Well, yeah.
A lot of times when we've played games and made characters, we've kind of multi-classed in a way to make them, or at least we've thematically taken wizards, sorcerers, and clerics and kind of made channelers out of them. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, even before Anakra was a thing, one of the worlds that contributed a great deal, because again, Anakra was because Matt and I have been world building and playing in all these games and stories for years and years and years, and Anakra is what happened when we said, wait a minute, we can take all of these and put them in one world, and now we have like an actual setting. So the characters and magic systems that inspired the Channeler, we've been tinkering with that since 2005. And even in 2005, when we were playing 3rd edition, I would always monkey with, well, how can I make this character in D&D? There's no real class that does this. So the concept has been floating around for 15, 16 years. It's just that, recently, so we've always been thinking about how to implement it. Recently, we've been trying to actually go about doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, both of us, kind of kicking around the bush here, the Channeler really started out when you were role-playing on a on a fantasy server,
Yeah.
ages and ages and ages ago. That was before we even knew what a channeler would be. You were role playing one back in the day.
So
And really, because of my, my background with, again, not so into anime anymore, but when I was a youngster, I was really, and I mean, just about every, you know, main character that bonds with some kind of ancient spirit or ancient, uh, background character that gives them powers. Again, most recently, something like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure
right.
kind of really pushes into that. Uh, I always had characters that would make bonds with their ancient ancestor or some kind of spirit of some kind or another.
Uh, which is a good introduction to what the channeler is as an idea. The channeler, yeah. So the channeler is a vessel for magical energy. And usually, almost always, but not always, much like a cleric doesn't always have a deity, uh, the channeler often has a pact or bond with a specific entity. But whereas so if you're going to invent a new class, a completely new class, no one's going to stop you. But if you're trying to like pitch a new class, you need to have a very good reason for why this class should exist instead of falling under a subclass or the umbrella of some other class.
Absolutely. I mean, most every class out there could just be a subclass that
Yes.
isn't already one of the established ones.
Like when we were designing things, one of the first things we ask ourselves and each other is, could this be a subclass instead?
And I mean, one of the things that we did, I mean, gosh, we've been technically on and off working on this for years, but we've really been putting a lot of our work into the channeler over the last, I would say, 2 years is what we've been really going through the versions of. And I mean, we experimented with making it a half caster. We tried making it just a reskinned warlock. There's a lot of weird things we were trying with it before settling on what we're doing now. But most recently, we even thought about making a channeler subclass for every single class in the game.
Which is very similar to what Unearthed Arcana recently did for psionics. Rather, like they introduced the
Yes.
Mystic class, which is, hey, here's a psionics system. Here is psionics in 5th edition. Try it out. But they also did a bunch of psionic themed subclasses. And you can see this theme if you look at the Eldritch Knight and the Arcane Trickster, for the warrior, for the fighter and the rogue. Those are wizard themed because they use very similar casting systems to wizards. Those are wizard spellcasting subclasses for other classes. So we were looking at the possibility of, do we just need to, if we have this idea of someone who is a vessel for spirits and for spiritual energy, do we need a new class, or can we just create sort of a theme and layer it out as subclasses around multiple different classes? But ultimately, we decided to go out there and try to create a new magic system and a new class. So, as I've said, the idea behind the channeler is that they are a vessel. The wizard learns spells as like a scientist. They study arcane tomes, they learn how to cast spells. A sorcerer is a font of magical power. They have this innate magical energy residing within them, a special heritage, or it's in their blood, right? That's the idea, is that they are magical. They have magical power. A druid, it depends on who you ask. In Anakra, druids speak to the spirits of the land and the elements and get them to do what they want. But they're tapped into the power of nature. A cleric taps into a higher power through prayer and meditation. So you've got, and a warlock makes a deal and receives magical power from a patron. So the idea of actually
And then bards are just really funny.
and then bards are just, I don't know, I picked up a lute and this guy died. It was weird. So the channeler, the whole idea behind a channeler is being a vessel. A warlock gets magical power from their patron, but they aren't like inhabited by their patron. A channeler, they're whatever spirit they're bonded to, or whatever spiritual energy they are connected to, flows through them using their body as a conduit. That's the central thematic idea behind the channeler and what sets them apart from other magical classes.
And I think, touching on what you were saying before, should we do the channeler as a subclass? And I think there is a world, especially if this goes well, where we'd be able to give it the Eldritch Knight or Arcane Trickster treatment for very specific classes. But really, the thing that was the standout for me, and I think Joe really accepted as well, was the big, because you know how like barbarians get rage and druids get wild shape, and there's or paladins get smite. Every single class, they by second level get the thing that they do,
That sets them
and
apart, right? Their unique
exactly
thing, their touchstone
they're
ability,
they're exactly their touchstone, not the cornerstone like the end thing or the capstone, but
capstone,
like
right?
yes, But so what I was thinking is that with a channeler, when they're channeling this energy they get from this spirit, again, not a pact they've made, but more so a bond. They have ended up interacting with either an energy source that maybe takes a more generalized, it's not a specific entity, or they do make some kind of a deal or some kind of like a partnership with a very specific spirit, and they get an aura of that. They're able to, a certain number of times per day, they can activate that, not divine, but that primordial energy within them that they receive from this bond they have, and they are able to have this mantle of power. And depending on the spirit that they make this bond with, they're able to do either elemental auras, or they can do like mental, ancient ancestor auras. They're able to get some kind of base primordial power from this spirit, and it allows them then to cast spells. One of the things that Joe and I found very early that we liked was the fact that we were going to build a spellcaster that didn't have an actual spell slot list. It was going to be a lot similar to how he described the Scion works. And again, right now we're playing with how we're doing the point system for what they do to cast spells. But one thing we did like was that this class is able to cast cantrips all on their own. They have a certain amount of magical affinity just by bonding with their spirit. But specifically, when they activate their mantle, they're at the height of their power and they get access to spells based off the mantle they know. There are going to be quite a few mantles. I would say at least a dozen mantles probably to start. Uh, and then as you level up, you'll start with 2 and you get more as you level up. Certain, of course, subclasses get different things to go along with that. But for the most part, you're kind of really, again, going back to anime, you basically go Super Saiyan a certain number of times per day and you get to do what your class is all about.
Chat has a couple of questions. It's like a symbiotic relation between the channeler and the source of their power, or it's like an avatar for a god. So, funny you should mention that. We're working with 3 different subclasses for the channeler. One of them is a warrior style channeler, kind of like being a Hexblade Pact warlock.
Yeah.
And their whole idea is that I originally called that subclass the Avatar. Not as in, I mean, very much like Avatar:
Yeah,
The Last
very
Airbender. Like, it's
similar.
in the same idea. Is you become inhabited by these spirits or these entities, and you gain access to their combat knowledge, which helps you become a more. While this state is active, you're a more effective warrior. We're dealing with the name. We're juggling back and forth on whether the Avatar should be the name of that subclass, but it's 100% the right idea. Aside from Avatar: The Last Airbender and the Avatar state, Matt, can you think of any other examples that we could really think of as channelers from popular media of different kinds?
Yeah, so again, like I said earlier, with the recent boom of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, you have uh, kind of going with. Mm, yes, I was going to lead this into the character that you made, and then the character that I made as like a way to go
I'll
with
talk
it.
about that in a sec. I'm trying to
Yeah,
see,
you will.
like, as a thought exercise, are there people that people might know
I
about?
the one that jumps out at me would be something like JoJo's. Again, I feel like that would more so be like if you did a monk subclass of this, because that's very punchy.
Right, you're
This
a
I
punchy
don't
guy,
think
but you have this special state you can activate by channeling this thing.
I think what this is kind of going for is not just that, but like for instance, characters like, again, not citing just Yugi from Yu-Gi-Oh, but he is a shrimpy, kid who turns into a sexy anime god, and
Right, because he has this ancient
that's
Egyptian pharaoh he channels to gain its skill at
yeah,
children's card games.
and I'm not the most up on especially recent pop culture, but just trying to think of the different shows and stories I've seen. That's really kind of what we're going for. Is and again with the aura thing, I feel like what Joe was getting at earlier, like with clerics not having to have a god, even though a cleric itself sounds more pious. And, I think fifth edition is trying to move away from, hey, if you yourself aren't don't subscribe to a particular type of religion or idea of it, your character doesn't have to as well. We have the same kind of thing for the channeler, is that you don't have to pick a specific, I'm going to be bonding with the spirit of fire. Like, there's a offshoot of sin that I'm going to be, taking the mantle of or whatnot. You could just like with one of Joe's early characters, Marcus Rolani. I don't think he ever got together with a specific entity, right? It was
No,
more so kind of like how sorcerers do their thing. One of the things we're trying to do with the channeler is that it's not saying you have to do a certain thing. again, flavor wise, you absolutely can say, oh yeah, my family has had this protector spirit of air in our family. It's a spirit of knowledge, and it's a spirit of generosity, and it has been our guardian totem for as long as our family can remember. And I've bonded with that, and that is the spirit that I carry with me on my adventure. You can absolutely do that flavor wise. However, I think you could easily go the pact, again, being more so like a sorcerer, in that you have a connection to, yes, a primordial force. So there is a energy sense that you are bonding with, that you're getting your power from. But if you don't want to role play that out, you don't have to have some, old dead guy that follows you around going, hey, you should totally gank that guy because he killed me in a past life.
So let's talk a little bit about channelers in Anakra, because some guy brought up Alan O'Dell technically channeled Ioth. If you wanted, like, that could be a backstory, but let's talk about Kost.
Yeah.
So all the adventures that have taken place so far on Casters and Castles have taken place on the eastern continents, which is not officially, but is kind of my playground to a certain degree. Matt and I share like creative input over the whole world, but a lot of the stuff I work on tends to be on the eastern path, the eastern continents. Whereas a lot of stuff that Matt works on is in the western continents. For example, Sharon was something that, while we both came up with it together, it was actually, a lot of it was Matt's input and Matt's ideas. And we recently decided that Sharon is not in the eastern continents, it's in the western continents. In the northern section of the western continent is a land called Kost. And it's massive. It's absolutely, it might be the largest sort of, not monoculture by any means, but like it's a huge land. It's as large as China. And during the history of our world of Anakra, there was a period called the Demonic Imperium where the Earth Sovereign was slain and Infernals and their minions ran rampant across the world, ruling, much of everything. And one of the ways that the people of Kost broke free from that is their Kost consists of all sorts of different clans and tribes and settlements and civilizations. But the one thing they have in common is that their ancestors, in their time of need, went on a pilgrimage and formed bonds with local and elemental spirits. Another one of the ideas of Anakra is that everything is alive. There's a spirit of this tree and of this river and of this mountain. And many of these spirits are weak, but some of them are quite powerful. So the ancestors of Kost went and they formed bonds with these powerful spirits, and they became channelers, and they used that magical power to overthrow the demonic imperium in their area and accomplish their freedom. And ever since then, their ruling nobles have had this blood lineage connection to these ancestral spirits. So, for example, there's a spirit called Kelvius, which is an ice spirit, which is bound to a particular house, House Leferiarte. And that house they go back many, many generations of originally forming this pact with this spirit. And ever since then, the firstborn of that house has inherited this connection to the spirit of Kelvius. And so their ruling line are all channelers. And the nobility, every single noble family in Kost, you are a noble family because your house has a spirit. So that's one of the prime examples of channelers in Anakra lore. Matt had a character, and I'll talk about my character in a moment as well soon. Matt had a character who canonically exists in Anakra, but not for like 1,000 years. Who was a warrior who had a bond to that spirit I mentioned, Kelvius, as well as a fire spirit. And so when we were designing the channeler class, we wanted to make sure you could be a warrior, not just a spell casting utility person. And so Matt's character is one of the icons that we used to create that idea. And the culture of Kost, even though that character won't exist for 1,000 years, that culture of having these house spirits and the nobility, the firstborn channels, your ancestral spirit of the house, that is already in place during Castles and Castles. It's just way, 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 way far away.
Across the endless oceans and all that.
All right, so let's go to chat and answer some questions.
Yeah, so originally, One Shot was asking about if the power that you ended up bonding with, would it choose you? Would you be, choosing it? Or, again, where does it kind of fall into the place where it kind of feels a little more cleric-like?
So let's talk about Marcus. First off, I would argue that the channeler is more similar to a warlock than a cleric.
I would see it, yeah, like a warlock or even a druid, having that again that connection to the primordial, but not so much on the nature end of things. You could
Right.
pick spirits that are very nature oriented, but it's not in essence you bonding with the spirits of Earth and things like that.
Well, the other direction you can take it is that a cleric worships a deity or something and uses prayer and stuff to, yes, they become a conduit of its power, but unless you narrate it this way, clerical magic does not specifically say that like that god or power inhabits you. It's like you learn your spells and you get your spells from them. The channeler is specifically inhabited and invested with this power, and they enter this heightened state during which the mantle of power descends upon them and they emanate this energy. And while that energy is emanating from them, they can do very, very strong things. So,
Absolutely. I would also argue, unless did you want to continue? I'm
no,
sorry.
you go, you go.
Oh, I wanted to just jump in and say I think the big difference between a channeler and a cleric is that a channeler, or rather, I'll start with cleric. A cleric would pray to Sin Alguar and get this deity of fire and trade and creativity.
Civilization, yeah.
Civilization. You would get those domains from being a part of that deity, and you are taking this very big guy, this very big boss character, and they're granting you again that list that you're going to be choosing from. Whereas
Here's some
I
power.
feel I feel like that's like a tier 5 person that you're praying to get their power from. For my idea with for how I see channelers, you're not going to God and saying, "Hey God, give me powers." You're more so like a warlock. Warlocks usually again are like archfey, they're demons. They're not usually gods that you're making pacts with. It's usually like a tier 3 or a tier 4, powerful but not usually divine entity. And I feel like the channeler's in the same boat. You're basically saying, "Hey, CR5, like again early on, CR5 elemental that has a name. I'd like you to bond with me and give me your power, and I will make sure that I help you with some kind of goal that you're going for." Or just pushing out, making sure that fire helps reign supreme. Whatever, kind of flavor thing you want to go with for that. And as you level up, you either can stick with one spirit and you're like nurturing that spirit. Again, flavor's your own deal, but you could be nurturing that again, like kind of like Kelvius. You could be nurturing this named spirit of your family, making them better and better, and they level up with you. Or you could technically say, "Oh, I'm just bouncing as soon as I get high enough level,
I'm
I'm making a
upgrading.
pact. I'm making a pact with a new spirit." But I feel like you're never going higher than like tier 3 or tier 4 with most of these spirits. They're all going to be staying in that power level because again, you're taking that spirit into your own form, and you're basically acting as the vessel for them to be able to affect the world. I feel like uh, with that, the big difference between a cleric and a channeler is that with a cleric you have this huge spell list that you're able to pick from, and you can kind of tailor your spells again with bonuses from your domain to give you very specific spells. You are able to kind of make the kit that you want, whereas with a channeler you have a preset list, much like again the mystics are doing in the Unearthed Arcana 5th edition, where they pick a certain discipline and they get certain abilities with that discipline. You get a certain amount of mantles that as you level up, you're able to get more access to where you can switch between these mantles, but you're basically switching through a few predetermined spell lists, and you're not making do, but you're taking the flavor of what that mantle is doing, and by being able to switch between them, that's what you're making for your character. So you have some preset parameters that you're working around, which is why you're going to be making either you have one spirit that has a few different templates that you're kind of borrowing from, or you're making packs with multiple spirits is the kind of thing.
Right. The other thing is that this doesn't necessarily have to be a pact. It's you just are able to inhabit this spirit. Like a warlock specifically makes a pact. They make a deal with them, and you have to curry favor. A warlock's lore heavily implies the existence of a specific entity. A channeler. There was another question in chat. Is that how would you differentiate? What would differentiate a channeler from a shaman? I would argue that. Give me one sec.
Well, first of all, what is a shaman in terms of 5th edition?
Right, there isn't a 5th edition shaman class, at least not an official one, and unless you create a specific, like druids wild shape, they are nature related and they wild shape and they cast from this list. So if you created a shaman class, like then you'd have that. But if you met somebody's shaman, like if you went to this culture and you met their shaman, I would argue that that shaman could be a warlock if they've made a pact with a specific nature entity like an archfey. They could be a cleric, they could be a druid, or they could be
They
a
can be a
channeler.
channel.
And I think
Absolutely.
like it would really make a lot of sense for a shaman to mechanically be a channeler.
A channeler.
Like that makes a lot
Absolutely.
of sense to me. So
I
again,
mean, just like how a fighter is like a warrior and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, I don't think you have a fighter walking around going, "Oh, hello." Like you are the fighter, but they don't go, "Hello, I'm a fighter." I fighter college, and you know, even though like to me, like a wizard. Oh yeah, they're gonna go around saying, "I'm a wizard." That's a very specific kind of thing in stories and lore that to be proud of. But really, I mean, in our real life, things like wizard or sorcerer, those are all kind of interchangeable titles. In games, they get very specific. Oh, that's what this thing is.
but as a
But if you were to
cultural
ask,
role,
oh yeah, if you were to ask Joe Schmo, what's the difference between a shaman and a druid? They're going to go, excuse me?
right? Uh, I think another example is completely gone because I forgot it. Um, but
Oops, sorry about that.
but I do want to move away from the language of pact because
No, and part of it, I was going to point out, I think there's only so many ways that you can say bond without going into similar words. But yes, you're not literally making a deal or a pact or whatnot. It's mostly like Joe had said, you are a vessel and you've learned to open yourself up to the world around you, and being able to draw in the essence of the primordial is kind of really what we're going for with this.
yeah,
And as a player, if you choose for that to take on the appearance of a spirit of ice from the dawn of time named Kelvius, who is the guardian of a certain family, then you can do that. But if you can just say, oh yeah, I met this river spirit when I was trekking through the hills, and he just so happens to be able to help me with this, and so I decided, yeah, man, tag along, let's do this. Or you don't even have to go into that. You could just say, I draw my energy from the spirit of this lake, and that's where you leave it at that. You don't really get into it.
right. You could also say that you're just naturally sensitive, right? You have this innate ability to channel. You're heavily attuned to nature and to the world around you, and so you can draw this in. Some of the lore specifics come from the subclasses to a certain degree. I will bring up one of my characters whose name is Marcus. No relation to Saicho's character in our last campaign, because again, it's several thousand years from then. Uh, but his whole thing was he started out as an empath, an empathic healer, where he was psychically sensitive to people's emotional states, and he could heal people by absorbing their injuries. So he would become injured and they would be healed, and he had an accelerated healing rate as well. So I take some damage, you get healed, and I'll recover faster than you would have. Oh, you broke your leg farming the fields. Okay, I'll take that on. My leg breaks, but my leg will heal faster than your leg, or like we'll split the leg break between the two of us. Uh, Eventually, he, in a series of very, very unfortunate events, loses that ability and instead forms a bond with fire. He doesn't have a fire spirit that hangs out with him. He doesn't know the names of any fire spirits. He just becomes attuned to fire. So rather than being able to just cast spells left and right, in order for him to use this magic, he needs a source of fire nearby so he could draw upon it. And then now that he can become covered in fire. If he saw fire in the wild, he could manipulate it. He could turn magical energy, loose ambient magical energy into
I make
fire.
rolls.
I make rolls, that sort of thing. So he was functionally a channeler, but he had no bond with a specific spirit. He just had the ability to channel specific types of energy. Yeah, became a conduit for his powers. That's exactly it.
Just to touch on what One Shot was asking earlier, we definitely wouldn't be having you do any kind of like multi-class. This would all be self-contained within the class. I can see what you mean in regards to that, and I mean there definitely is options for that. You could start as a channeler, and thereby again eventually making a pact with with a warlock overseer, or you can take like God forbid if you wanted the elemental monk, you could take the elemental divinity monk and kind of really go full blown avatar with it. There's a lot of things that you definitely can do. But what we're really more so, again, we're trying to leave it a little more open ended for people to get as into it as they want.
Right.
And again, we're using characters either through role play, actual play, or stories that we've been writing for the last decade or more as templates for a lot of the starting ground that we have with this. Again, it just made a lot of sense to us because if you take a look at some of these characters we've been playing, again, just like with everything else in fifth edition, you could easily take the channeler and parse it out and just get really specific with some of these effects in a subclass. We just feel that by putting it into a subclass and structuring it into 3 or 4 abilities that you get as part of something else, it doesn't have the same level of what we're going for unless you completely 180'd it by, let's say, making it a druid and then saying, oh, your first level feature is taking or your second level or whatever is taking away wild shape and giving you a mantle instead.
Which you can't
That
really do with a class.
yeah, no, I mean, that's the kind of homebrew that I think you see a lot of out there, and that's where I think I draw the line with it getting a little too wacky. Especially because one of the big things for the channeler that we were going for is, aside from having this really specialized caster that is able to form these bonds and to get different options, it was basically the anti-caster. Eventually, they end up getting an ability to where they're able to basically, when someone is casting a spell at them, they're able to take that energy and be able to either fuel it themselves or turn it back against their attacker. Now, again, we're figuring out a way in the actual 5th edition game to make that work without it being nuts, and I think I found a way to do it. Uh, Mostly basing it off of the a weird version of the cleric's channel divinity. Uh, but that it stands that basically it's taken a lot of time for our elevator speech for the channeler to get where it is, and I think we're finally at a point where it's mostly there. And I think, Joe, unless you have a very different idea than I do, and I think the subclass, of course, changes it, but the way I would kind of describe it is a specialized anti-caster uh, that does stuff. Which, I mean, you could say about just about anybody, the last part, but
Mechanically speaking, the channeler is a light combatant who can activate special elevated magical state called a mantle to gain access to magical abilities for a short period of time, and they specialize in manipulating magical energy.
there you go.
Yeah.
Let the talkie guy say that part.
You'll notice we don't have a fluff paragraph at the start of this yet. First off, they do cast spells, but I kind of want to start breaking down some of the pieces here, so we can go more into these details. So the channeler, they have a D8 hit die, which is similar to the warlock. They have light armor and simple weapons, again similar to the warlock. They have Constitution, Wisdom saving throws. They aren't weapon specialists, but they are able to basically defend themselves. Are we still going?
And again, moving away from just talking about the warlock specifically, most casters now, either if they're a glass cannon caster like a sorcerer or a wizard, get D6s, but a lot of the other either not the half, but a lot of the other side main casters get D8s. Like the cleric also gets D8s. Again, I kind of see the channeler as a hybrid between the cleric and the warlock in a lot of ways, and that especially goes for the skills that they get when they first begin their levels, as well as the options they get. Again, they're very similar in regards to some of the aspects for a warlock, but a lot of it kind of kicks in to really comparing them to the cleric. Like for instance, the cantrips that we give them. We're trying to keep a lot of it uh, again as balanced as possible without having to tweak too much as we go.
All right. So when they start out, they don't have full spell progression, but they do have cantrips. It looks like the current version lets them pick from any spell list. Is that the case?
Well, so again, one of the things that we're taking a look at here is that we either need to come up with a channeler spell list, which we can do. However, one of the things is that by basically making each mantle its own spell list, I feel like we're getting into some territory that's a little bit kind of like, why bother? Again, the only difference is that if we end up keeping the effectively Mystic Arcanum, in which we're calling it Esoteric Transcendence, if we keep that ability to where once they hit 11th level and every odd level thereafter until they hit 17, they get a 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level spell. We could keep that option, and which is what we're currently running with. I think, though, I liked your idea of just putting spells entirely in the mantle. Again, it leaves a lot for us to have to do there, but it then takes a big stride away from the warlock, which is what we're really trying to do in a lot of this. Because again, we don't want this to step on a lot of toes
Right. It needs to
for
be
the
its
other
own
classes.
distinct class with its own distinct identity, mechanical identity.
But there are quite again. That's the big thing I think we would need to address with the channeler is coming up with its own spell list, especially considering in the recent 5th edition errata, which we were trying to get to and didn't quite get there,
That's fine.
is that one of the changes they made was making it to where every single spellcasting class specifically talks about their spells in relation to their class. So there's a lot of feats or there's a lot of special abilities that talk about being able to utilize all classes things. And I think the channeler is in a weird place where we could probably get away with it because again, if we make it to where they can choose all cantrips, but they only get a couple, and then they get some specific ones for the mantle, that would be a bit different. And then doing a similar thing for the high level spells. But I think there should be a way, considering the rest of the classes have now erratized themselves. I made that word up just now, to where they're class specifying their spell lists and whatnot. I think we would need to do the same, even if
Yeah.
it did kind of feel a little bit. I can't think of the right word, but not a waste of time, but especially if we do for the main spells, keep them all locked within the mantle like we're doing. It really does kind of feel like we would just be making a spell list for the cantrips.
I think what we're going to end up with is a very short list of heavily support-focused cantrips, very generic. Like, it's just, you're going to pick, because the rest of your cantrips are linked to the mantles, like, you got to have something at level 1 for spellcasting, but we're going to take a look at this. The other thing is, this is one of the classes that, let me talk to chat. I don't think I've read the Kineticist from Pathfinder. I haven't played Pathfinder in a long time, but I might pull it up just for inspiration to learn more from it. So the Channeler is one of the classes that gets its subclass immediately. You see this with the Warlock, you see this with clerics picking their domains. A lot of the spellcasters have to pick this right out the bat. I think, does the Wizard not pick it at first level? Because I think the Wizard
I believe
does.
the Wizard and the Druid don't. I don't think, but the Sorcerer does, the Cleric does. A good half of them do.
Yeah, so this is one of the classes you have to pick your spiritual aspect, your subclass, immediately. And the ones we have right now are the Empath, the Spiritualist, and the Incarnation.
Or the Avatar, the Medium, or the...
I
think it was the Empath anyway.
Yeah, the Empath.
Yeah. Well, because, I mean, we've got Marcus down pat, pretty much.
Exactly. So the idea behind the three of them, the Empath has that... They focus on that healing ability, the empathic transfer of damage that we were talking about. And they don't have to be, but they do tend to be a little bit more of a support role. The Spiritualist, which at one point we were calling the Medium, their whole thing is that they get more mantles, and they can swap their mantles. Because if you think about a spiritual, like an empath might be somebody who has this innate connection to people, to fire, to dreams, to water. They have this innate connection, or to a spirit, and it's just part of them. The Spiritualist or Medium is somebody who knows the rites, rituals, like the incense and the circles, in order to draw spirits and talk to them and like summon them. So if you think about like a seance, where this person becomes a vessel for the dead to speak through, a Spiritualist does that sort of stuff. And so they're
kind of like an occultist or a demonologist in a sense. So
they learn the names of different spirits and can bond with different spirits they meet in the wild. So they're more of a tech utility.
They're kind of they're like, if you're going to play a channeler that's more like a wizard, you're going to be playing the kind of
exactly.
They start off with a ritual book, or a book of rites rather, where they're able to basically do the ritual casting. That's like their big thing. And the main feature they get later on is being able to do this trance that opens them up to being possessed by spirits and being able to get different bonuses and mantles by doing that. But like Joe was saying, their whole thing is being able to switch up, because mostly for a channeler, you start with 2 mantles, and it takes, you end up, right now the way we have it is that you get 3 eventually, and you max out by knowing 4, and that every time you level up, you can exchange 1, like most other classes let you do when you level up. But this one allows you eventually to where they're able to, not on the fly, but as part of a rest, they're able to switch out their mantle to make them a lot more prepared. Exactly. They're a lot more versatile. They also gain an additional mantle at a certain level as well. So they're the ones that kind of, they can swap. They have like a deck of mantles. They're able to kind of go, okay, what do I need for this specific task?
And there was a question in chat earlier about whether it would require multiclassing to change these different mantles, because by the description of the class, it does very much sound like, oh, you have a mantle of fire and you have a mantle of ice. Those are diametrically different. How would you explain having a bond with one spirit who gives you both of those? And while you could find a lore justification for that, you know, in the examples we've used in game, it's either been I literally have 2 house spirits that I can inhabit and switch between, or I'm not, you know, I don't have spirits, I just am a vessel for elemental energy, and I've learned how to open myself up to fire and to ice because they're both aspects of heat. But the Spiritualist just really lets you futz around with these things, and the lore and the gameplay work together.
Exactly. I mean, and technically, you could be a combination of them. If you took a character, again, like Marcus was, he could have an innate connection to fire, but he may bond with a spirit of, let's say, psionic energy, something like that, to where they're able to do a lot of mental stuff by having this spirit, but they themselves have this kind of really specific connection to fire. Again, I think a lot of that is just really flavor text that you as a player should be able to decide how you want that to play out. And I much like with a paladin, I mean, like when you take your oath, you have like your specific tenets that you usually have to follow. But again, a lot of paladins don't even have a specific god that they pray to, you can definitely do that. But it's kind of like if you had to specify, like, oh, you have to pick this one god, and you always have to be with that god the whole time. I think it might, again, not that there's anything wrong with that, but it might feel pretty limiting to a player that just wants to get in there and smite people. They don't want to have to really think about doing something like that.
Right. And one of the other things is the Master Thrower, like we were talking about earlier, is designed to be plug and play. If you have a world with thrown weapons and like badasses who walk around with knives in their hair and their boots and all that stuff, Master Thrower is right for you. The Channeler, we want to build a class that could be plug and play to anyone's campaign setting. Like you could just pick it up and it makes sense. You can find lore justifications, the mechanics all work, but it really has its roots in the world of Anakra with all of its many, many, many spirits.
Yeah, specifically, I mean, if you go to, like Joe was saying, if you go to a region like Cost, in Cost, yeah, you still have, again, there's no limitation in that campaign setting about being able to choose fighters and rogues and wizards and whatnot, but you're going to be seeing it, as, again, we keep building out the world and you go to a place like Cost, you're going to be seeing channelers every which way. And again, depending on how that channeler specs themselves out, they're going to, again, you're not going to have one that just takes the place of a rogue, but depending on what's amazing on 5th edition, you can be a criminal, a criminal background channeler, and you can do a lot of the same stuff that a rogue can do. You're just not going around ganking people with sneak attack, but you can pick a like a mantle of shadows and be able to be this very sneaky, turn invisible, make different images and whatnot. You're going to see a lot more of that, and actually being a barbarian or a sorcerer is going to be a little more rare in somewhere like Cost versus these wide varieties of channelers that you're going to be seeing.
All right, so the last one that we haven't mentioned yet is the Incarnation or the Avatar, and they are the more frontline mid-range fighter of the Channeler class. When the mantle descends upon them, they get increased abilities specific to combat. If you have a character who has like this, the Avatar, where within Avatar, when they activate the Avatar state, sure, their bending becomes incredibly powerful, but they also just have the combat knowledge and martial arts skill of all these past lives. And so
Exactly.
the Incarnation draws upon that idea of gaining martial prowess by letting this power or spirit descend upon them.
The big thing that sets the Incarnation or the Avatar apart from the others, again, aside from the fact that they do get these specific proficiencies that make them more martially capable, the abilities that really make them feel again, like they really belong, like kind of like on a battlefield or in combat, is that similar to the spiritualist or the medium, they are able to change their mantle on the fly. Now, while they don't actually get to switch out the specific type of mantle that they know, they are able to, initially as a bonus action or later on as a reaction, they are able to change the current mantle they have activated. Because usually, much like a rage, once you've activated a mantle, that mantle will last for a certain amount of either minutes or
So
rounds.
by
And
explanation, if one of the mantles I have is fire, I have an ice mantle and I have a fire mantle, and I'm an empath or a spiritualist, I can activate my fire mantle, become wreathed in flame, become resistant to fire, cast fire spells, but I can't switch on the fly to ice. I have to either end my activation or wait until it expires, and then I can key in my ice mantle and use all of that stuff. But go on, Matt.
whereas like the Incarnation, rather than having to do what Joe explained and spend another one of your precious uses of a mantle, the Incarnation is able to, on the fly, as either a bonus action or later on as a reaction, they can switch their active mantle, not taking on another use. Again, still keeping the same duration, and if they've spent any of their points that fuel their abilities, they don't get any of that back, but it gives them new options. So if the battlefield, or even not even in a battle, if the encounter or travel has changed to where you would benefit from having a different mantle on, you're able to do that as an Incarnation subclass. Likewise, again, they get originally we were going to go with just giving them extra attack, but kind of borrowing a little bit from what the Eldritch Knight does, especially since this is a caster. We wanted it to feel a little more like, again, the casting is really a big part of it. So as they get higher level, they're able to use one of their cantrips while they do an attack. So it adds that sense that they're still martially capable, but they're able to kind of keep that magic flowing as they go. And then later on, they get to the point where they are able to have basically one mantle on at all times. They select one of their mantles to become a primary mantle. And again, much like an avatar bender, they basically they could choose a fire mantle, and they are always a firebender. They always get the bonuses their mantle applies to them, and then they can activate other mantles as part of that and benefit from both of the bonuses. So they're basically can always be wreathed in fire, and then they can do that whole anime fire ice thing, or they can put the dream mantle on occasion. But they're basically able to switch through mantles on the fly, and also end up picking one to be like their main ability. That's the one they really focus on.
All right, so let's talk about the mantles themselves. Essentially, the way it works is you use a bonus action and you activate your mantle. You enter super mode. While you're in super mode, you get a passive bonus. Like every mantle has a different passive ability that's activated, and you have these points that you can spend in order to use different abilities associated with them. So you can cast spells from your fire mantle. You can throw out fireballs and stuff like that. But you burn through your mantle points as you do so.
And not all of the passives are usually going to be things like resistances. So if you have fire mantle on, you get like fire resistance. But again, something like a dream mantle where there's no specific damage type associated with it, you're likely going to be getting, now this is specified to this mantle, but you're going to be getting things like you could have advantage on persuasion checks,
Right.
or things like that. But you're always going to have some kind of a passive bonus that may or may not be completely combat oriented, and that's what we're going with for the mantles. Some of them are very obvious, like, oh yes, this will help you in battle. But even some of those, again, if you're traversing an area that is wreathed in flame, very, very dangerous, lava flows and all that stuff, you would throw the fire mantle on, not because you're expecting to get into a fight with a creature, but maybe just because if you accidentally fall in lava, you don't want to just die.
So you can activate your mantle X times a day, and it goes up as you level up. And you have these points you can spend on to use special abilities from your mantle, and it gives you a passive. That's sort of the core of
What
the
we're going,
experience.
absolutely.
Let's
Right now we're playing with the mantles quite a bit, figuring out exactly what we want to do with them. But that really is the crux of it: is that you use the points to cast spells, and you get a cool passive. We're thinking about, I think we're playing with the idea of having certain uh, cantrips associated with the mantles. I almost feel like just leaving that with the subclass itself. But again, that's what these playtests and whatnot are going to be useful
yeah,
for.
because this is already a fairly noodly class, and that's kind of the whole point of third-party design is that you can do more complicated, more noodly stuff than core design, but we still want it to be player friendly. So by the time we're actually done, we have a playable version of the class. We can explain it in 1/10 of the time that we've taken to talk about it.
Absolutely. It's funny, while working on this, the thing that, I mean, again, mostly because we already had a really good idea of the empath and what the incarnate would do, I was really looking forward to trying to experiment with the spiritualist. And I got to say, a lot of your ideas, mate, I initially was very resistant to, mostly because, again, that noodly language was very difficult to deal with. But once I parsed it down and kind of used, again, 5th edition language and a lot of the specific instances that certain monsters can do with different traits and abilities that they already possess, and kind of applying that to this, the spiritual trance trait, which is kind of the bread and butter of this subclass, I fell in love with. I really am looking forward to
Nice.
making a character that can use it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Really, what this subclass does is it does this trance that, for much like a ranger does with their primordial sense, or much like a paladin does with their divine sense, you're able to burn one of the uses of your mantle for the day. When you do that, you open yourself up by starting this meditation, and you're able to sense the presence of like celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead. It doesn't reveal where their exact location or the number is, but it lets you know that within that range if you sense them. So again, just off that, you get this ability that you are able to kind of use to, again, I mean, when have you not been a paladin, and when you walk in a room and there's a shifty guy, you go, I use divine sense. I want to see if that guy's
A demon in
a demon.
disguise or whatever.
Or if you're playing a grave cleric and you're like, hey, is that guy undead? Or if a ranger's looking for a dragon, it gives you a lot of playability with that. But again, beyond just being able to just look out and do the sense, which is why it's associated with burning one of your mantles, which is very important for you for the day, you can open yourself up to being possessed. As you gain levels, you can do things like forcing possession and things like that. But what it starts out with is that, let's say, for instance, you're a 5th level channeler, and you're with your party, and you end up encountering a fire elemental, and you're like, oh crap, whether this thing's going to be an enemy or not, you're like, dude, I've been really wanting to play around with a fire mantle. I'm going to do my spiritual trance and see if I can get this fire elemental to temporarily bond with me, so to give me access to its mantles. And again, a lot of this is going to come down to playing around with this and seeing how exactly it works, if it can end up being, too busted and whatnot. A lot of the features we're saving towards the end of the class to where you have to go quite deep in it before you can start using some of that creature's abilities. But it really just boils down to, you open yourself up to possession. As long as that creature gets adjacent to you, it can attempt to possess you. And then we have rules as to what it can do while it's possessing you, either to, again, wheel or woe you. Uh, and then you gain the benefit of a mantle. So, for instance, if this works out properly, when you burn your mantle to use the feature, you could, in essence, get a mantle off of it. So you're not wasting your thing. But if, again, that creature doesn't want to do that, or if you're just using it in order to kind of sense around you, you're having a cost to being able to do so.
So
I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play with.
let's say you're in an ancient tomb with all these dead warriors nearby. You could activate your trance and open yourself up, and one of these dead warriors could inhabit you. It could then attempt to control you and make you kill your friends, but if it is allied to you or you convince it, it could give you the Ancestral Warrior mantle that gives you all these like battle prowess powers. Or it could give you the Undeath, the Veil of Life and Death. So suddenly, as this ghost inhabits you, now you can control people's life force or scare them away with spooky ghost powers. You meet a fire elemental, and it possesses you, and now suddenly you can throw fireballs because there's a fire elemental in you. It's a very thematic ability that depends a lot about what you encounter in the wild. So the Spiritualist already has their own mantles that they can activate, so they can do cool stuff even if they don't meet a genie or a ghost or a demon or an angel or a fairy in the wild.
Exactly, and then we're the main thing about this is we're basically leaving all of this up to the what the DM is allowing you to do. Because much like every single druid out there, whenever they can, what's that spell where you can conjure woodland beings or whatever, and everyone wants to summon pixies because then they can cast all the spells a pixie can cast. The DM doesn't have to give that to you. The DM, you pick the CR of a creature that you want, and the DM tells you what shows up. So much like with that, whenever you have any kind of a creature that is one of these defined things, either an elemental, a celestial, a fae, a fiend, or an undead, the DM is going to let you know what can possess you. Because, for instance, if you roll into a dungeon and there's a zombie, and you're like, oh, that's an undead, and then the DM says, oh, well, that zombie's just going to eat you because it can't possess you. It's a zombie.
Right. It's not a ghost or a specter or a wraith or a phantom.
However, if you're in the presence of a fiend, whether that be a demon or a devil, it's very likely that thing is probably going to possess you if the DM gives it the ability to do so. The more incorporeal or energy-like the being is, the more likely that it's going to happen. Again, we don't want to list like a full-on list of this is all the monsters that it can do. We just list the type, and the DM will say, yeah, that's all. That can work. That's totally doable. And again, just like it was said in chats, we need to, again, it's a second level ability, so you'll need to make sure that, of course, through testing, we balance out if people are going to be trying to cast Speak with Dead way earlier than they should. I think there's definitely going to be some limits on it, and we may leave that up to the DM to put those limits in. I think we're very likely going to have to specify certain things you can and can't do during this trance, and we may make it to where that by 5th level, you're able to actually interact with these beings. Right now, what I'm kind of doing is, aside from the actual mantle that you get from it, we're just tacking on that while this thing is possessing you, you would get advantage on intelligence checks, basically things that I have to do with that creature. I do want to pick a specific wording for that makes it a little more specific, but the goal is to make it to where, like you were saying with the undead, if you have a creature that is interacting with you, rather than being able to ask it questions saying, hey, how did you die? What killed you, and trying to like cheat out some information from that, you more so can know the kinds of things that it knew in life. So it gives you like a non-combat boon. If you, again, I kind of see it as more like Constantine, whenever he's like trying to exercise creatures, and he opens himself up, oh, take me instead. You can kind of do a lot of fun stuff like that. Honestly, I see something like the Spiritualist as being a really fun character, not even for an actual adventuring game. You could probably base a whole campaign around a Spiritualist and its friends who would go around solving crimes and murders, but again, not using it to just speak to dead, but you would use it to kind of get like if the DM was saying, oh, you need to find out how the person was killed. You're not going to say, oh, hey, what killed you? But you can get advantage on intelligence checks to see, like, oh, when I'm investigating the room, the spirit guides its hand in a direction, and I look in a place that with my normal intelligence check I never would have looked at, but by this giving me that advantage bonus, oh, you happen to check over under this desk and see that such and such an item is there. And we're looking for more so that kind of flavor with it, not giving you the answer, but giving you the tools if you're not. Because a lot of times, again, I think Joe has suffered from this, especially when playing with me. He assumes that I'm smarter than I am. And he'll leave a very obvious clue that a lot of times I or my associates when we're playing just won't find. And I think this would be the kind of thing that would help push you in the right direction without just saying, "Look, man, it's under the case. Just look there. Come on."
I activate let the DM give me a hint as my special ability.
Exactly.
No, I think I think it's opens up a lot of really cool roleplay opportunities. So the empath's core thing is they get empathic healing. They can heal others and reduce their own hit point maximum until they take a short rest. They got some special abilities that sort of key off of that. They can move status conditions from their enemies to themselves, and then they have an accelerated ability to get rid of those. This is on top of just, oh, you have a fire mantle. When you activate it, you get fire resistance, and you can spend points to cast fire spells. So all these classes can key into these different special mantle abilities, but they also have their own thing going on. The spiritualist can enter this trance and swap out their mantles. The empath can heal and transfer status conditions, and eventually they can inflict exhaustion. Neat.
Well, because the big thing that we were doing was that this, aside from just maximum hit points by hurting themselves to heal others, their big thing is they exhaust their own selves. Which exhaustion, as we know in D, is you don't want exhaustion. That sucks all kinds of badness. And they're able to, like you said, end up either taking conditions or even negative effects from others and absorb it into themselves in the form of taking exhaustion to do so. And then later on, once you get to the capstone ability of the subclass, they can take that exhaustion that they themselves have and force it onto another. That person that they end up interacting with either gets the exhaustion and some damage, or if they save, they just take some damage resisting the effect.
But either way, you reduce your exhaustion by 1.
Exactly. So it allows you per day in order to kind of help negate that. We have some abilities here, like one of the things, and again, this if you take a look at like the aesthetic rejuvenation, they have the ability to where almost like the fighter who can do a healing surge, they can, as a bonus action, spend up to half their maximum hit dice rounded down in order to recover missing hit points as if they had taken a short rest. And that's important because as you look later on, they get the purgation ability to where they can reduce their exhaustion by 1 when they take a short rest. So by combining things like that, we're trying to set it up to where we're not going to just be gimping this person into where whenever they're using their abilities, they're like, oh, I don't actually want this because I don't want to take exhaustion. There is like within the kit, it's built to where basically once per rest, they either can just heal exhaustion by resting normally, or they have one ability that lets them, okay, here's your free gimme. You are able to do your cool ability, and if you don't want to hold on to moving at half speed or getting disadvantaged on your ability checks, you can do this thing once. However, if you do more than that, because the class doesn't stop you from doing more stuff, you can effectively start killing yourself by going above and beyond to help your team.
It's a great class for drama queens like me who love being like, oh, I will carry the burden for you. Oh, I'm in such pain, but you must carry on.
Exactly.
And we have the incarnation, the avatar, the battle dude. All right, so they get more weapon proficiencies. They get some combat cantrips. They can switch mantles mid-fight, which again, if you're fighting an enemy with multiple damage types, or you want to get a different special, like a wind mantle that increases your speed or something like that, you can go from a stone mantle that makes you resistant to damage, and when the enemy flees, you immediately swap to a wind mantle and run like the wind after them. They're the only class that can switch mantles mid-activation. They can do weapon attacks and cantrips at the same time. They effectively get expertise. Oh, they can change their mantle. This is the reason I'm saying oh to a lot of this is the last pass that Matt did on it. He's made a lot of cool changes. They can reactively change their mantles, and the Rite of Quintessence, which my original name for it, which I might fight for, is Now We Are One.
I know. Again, but a lot of this I was trying to go with, again, the 5th edition language and trying to stick along with the most abilities have a 2-word maximum. But yes, that is a very, very good name for sure.
Obviously thinking of Arthas.
Oh yeah.
All right, so you always have a mantle active. You don't have infinite points, so just because you always have the fire mantle active forever doesn't mean that you can spam fireballs. But it does mean that you always, from now on, you have fire resistance or whatever the other passive is.
And again, this is going to have to be played out. We're going to have to see. This is the intention. And by playing with it, we'll see what actually works.
So the idea is that's always active, and you can activate another one, so you really can combine them, like Matt said a while ago. So we're working on
the big point for this one is basically making it to where you have two mantles active at the same time, and we're using the wording such to make sure that they don't cancel each other out. However, again, like Joe had said, you want to make sure that you're not just using free effects all day long. There would need to be wording in here to make sure that it's basically just giving you an extra mantle. Right. So we'll need to basically figure out exactly how we're going to be putting this through, or you can even say that, of course, you have the fire mantle always active, but maybe you can't use powers and you would have to end up, activating a mantle. And then while that mantle is activated, that's when you get the points, and those points are shared between this mantle and anything else you're using. There will be ways we have to specify things to make it work, but at least for the first pass around, this is what we're going for.
Right. And then we have a list of all the different mantles, and we're working on a mechanic where a certain number of times a day, if you have a fire mantle active, you can stop a fire attack and then recharge your abilities. That's something that's still very much a work in progress, because it is part of our original idea for the channeler, is that if you are an ice channeler and somebody uses an ice attack, you don't just resist it, you can steal it. But that sort of stuff is very dangerous.
Did you get a chance to look at the magical absorption ability I put in at 5th level?
No, I think I scrolled past that. Let's take a look.
That's what I was trying to do to kind of give us what we were looking for there. Because really what we were trying to do was give them the option of being able to counterspell or dispel magic. And this is what I was saying in regards to making it similar to the cleric's channel divinity, is that it starts off really low. You can only use it once at a time, but as time goes on, you can do it more and more. And you're basically able to either counterspell a spell that's cast, or you can dispel magic to end up zapping up an already existing effect. And what that would do is, aside from using the spell with this feature, it would give you the chance to basically make it to where when you actually utilize this feature, I believe what I was playing around with, because I forgot exactly how Marcus was using it. I know that you used it to buff your stuff, and originally I had that in there, but then it felt to me like it was stepping on the toes of the School of War that the wizard gets in the Xanathar's guide, where they basically are able to do these power surges. And I liked it, but it felt too close to that. So what I was doing was giving them the chance of, whenever they absorb a spell, they get a certain amount of temporary hit points equal to the spell level, and then they can use that in order to pop and hit people. Go ahead. I was saying
the joys of remote work. The current version gives you 10 hit points equal to the spell level times 5, and you regain a number of mantle points equal to your character's proficiency bonus. So,
and I think I settled on that because I didn't like, again, feeling like I was ripping off the War Mage ability. Because I know initially, I think the way you did it with Marcus is that he would suck up fire, so he would prevent, again, much like Counterspell, he would prevent himself from getting hurt by fire. He would shroud himself in that extra energy and then release it for an extra big boost. That's kind of how it was used for the most part in story, right?
It was less of an extra, oh, now my attacks are going to be extra powerful. It was more the fact that he didn't have an innate magic reserve. He didn't recover his magic on a long rest. He was dependent on ambient sources of energy in his environment. So he would effectively have had a maximum mana cap and no mana regeneration. Instead of mana regeneration, he would steal...
So this feels pretty good then, right?
Yeah, I think we might tweak with it a little bit, but definitely replenishing mantle points. I think that it might be too many temp hit points, and maybe only some people, like the avatar, gets the temporary hit points or something like that. But the part where you eat their spell and gain, more mantle points just to fuel your own abilities is right on brand.
And I think, I think that's where we're going to end up with this. I like the idea of the 10 hit points. That felt like something like you eat spells and then you put a shield on yourself. That felt pretty good. But again, depending on how we want this to work, like you said, different things may happen as you level up. And I think, to me, getting the points back is more important than getting a temporary hit point shield.
I think that's the core. That's the core of it. Is that because the channeler is a conduit for magical energy, when magical energy is floating around there, they snatch it, and then, if I'm a fire channeler and you cast a lightning bolt or a polymorph, I can grab that raw magical energy, break apart your spell, and take it, but the only thing I can turn it into is fire. I can't, take your lightning bolt and shoot it back at you unless I'm a lightning channeler. But I could just, take that lightning, break down the spell, absorb its magical energy, and now my fire is replenished.
So then I think that's pretty perfect then with the getting points back. That seems pretty
Yeah,
on point.
that's
We're trying to,
100% on brand. And you can do it
and I
once.
think if we put it
Go ahead.
once. Oh yeah, and I think attaching it to like just a base ability and not. I think if we put too much on each mantle, it's going to be a lot of text per mantle.
Yeah,
So my thought with pulling that ability out of mantles was to make the mantle just the passive and the features, making it really
I think
approachable
that's a
and
really good
easy.
design perspective. All right.
Much like with the Channel Divinity, I was making it to where when you get it at 5th level, you could use it once per short rest. So again, much like you're basically getting a spell slot for counterspell or spell magic, and then if you get a rest, you get it back. And then as you level up, you get more uses of it to where you max out at level 18 by doing it 3 times. By 10th level, you can do it 2 times, much like the Channel Divinity feature.
You know, I was freaking out about the 3 times, and then I looked at the level 18, and I'm fine with it.
Well, yeah, because no one's ever going to. I mean, you figure no one's plays beyond 10th level part anyway.
Right. So, and then each mantle, like, there's a ton of them. You can have fire, you can have, like, good fae, evil fae, you can have creepy alien things, you can have infernals, and it's easy to design. Dream is one of my favorites. It's easy to design new mantles. You just pick a theme, you pick a passive ability, and you pick a spell list. Is there anything that a monster or enemy could do to stop the channeler from burning a mantle?
By burning a mantle, do you mean activating it? Is that what we're saying?
Yeah,
Because we're trying to use the terminology of activating, much like whenever a barbarian rages, it says while raging. The terminology I'm trying to use, and again, I think the word mantle makes it weird. I think you can't say mantling. So what I'm using is that while a mantle is active or
yeah.
activating a mantle, that's what I'm kind of using for that terminology. So is that what you're meaning by that, some guy? Is that can a monster stop you from activating a mantle?
I
Much
don't.
like a druid wild shapes, I don't think there's a feature that would necessarily stop a druid from wild shaping or a paladin from smiting. Those are things that are really out. If it was a spell, absolutely. But the thing is, we're attaching spells to the mantle, not making the mantle something that can be countered necessarily, because it's the main bread and butter of the class.
Right. Like, you can block a paladin's smite, but you can't stop them from smiting. You can avoid a raging barbarian or tie them up, but you can't stop them from raging except by beating the hell out of them. The thing is,
Or
though,
by just not attacking them or getting attacked.
right. The thing is, though, a mantle would not function in an anti-magic field.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So again, there's not a lot of counterplay for a wild shaping druid. There's very limited stuff in the game that can stop someone from shapeshifting, but an anti-magic field would stop them from doing so.
And again, I think that would be, to me at least, I think that would be DM fiat, because I think like as part of the game, you wouldn't say an anti-magic field will allow you to not use mantles, because then you could just have a DM that says, oh yeah, this is a whole world that's anti-magic field, and then your guy can't even do his main.
Well, I mean, at that point, you can't have wizards, like. Not,
Dude, I've heard some really weird games where the DM doesn't talk to the player, and then the character is kind of screwed the whole time just because of some weird little thing that they didn't really address. But yeah, I totally get you.
yeah.
I mean, technically, an anti-magic field, even if we didn't have it suppress the mantle, you wouldn't be able to use any of the powers. All you would get from the mantle would be the passive.
Right. So it would
Even
still
if we
effectively
didn't.
lock you down.
Yeah, I mean, because you wouldn't be able to use any of the features. Now, we were thinking about experimenting with much like the monk that gets the elemental thing, can use some abilities that aren't actual spells. I originally was liking that, but I'm kind of, especially now with that comment, I think that's definitely a good idea, making it to where the mantles only do spells, just because the subclasses get a rich variety of different abilities they can use that aren't spells locked to them. I think that's a really simple and good way to do it, is to just
Yeah.
lock spells into the mantle.
Just a
And
passive
again, an
and
anti-magic
your
field
spell
would
list.
screw you.
But again, an
Absolutely.
anti-magic field should screw any primary spellcaster. And
Absolutely.
the channeler, regardless of whether they're a primary spellcaster, they're very much a magical class. So let's sort of, we've been talking quite a lot. Let's try to boil down the essential, like, gameplay experience of playing a channeler.
Yeah.
You are lightly armored, so you're not a frontline combatant. You have some knowledge abilities pertinent to magic and nature and religion. You can be persuasive, but you're definitely not athletic or acrobatic, which is something we might want to look into for the incarnation, by the way. Giving them athletics or acrobatics or something like that, because they're not on the class list otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, we could do that with something like again, right now I think the 10th level ability is kind of in flux with the enhanced manifestation. So we could make it to where one of the things I actually was thinking about experimenting with this for, instead of picking proficiencies you're already skilled with and giving you expertise, would be doing something similar. You know how the rogue can make it to where any proficient skill that it has, it can when it rolls a 10 or rolls a 9 or lower, it counts it as a 10. I was thinking of experimenting with that, and you pick an ability modifier. So, for instance, you could pick strength. Any strength skill you make, you get that feature for.
That's
Or
OP. That's wild. Oh my god, can you imagine? Like, oh, you never fail athletics checks. You
whoa,
almost
no, no, no,
always.
no, no. Again, but I think you're thinking about a rogue. If you look at it this way, if you are not proficient in athletics and you have a, let's say, a +2 strength, then you're making it to where you can't roll lower than a 10. So now you rolled a 12 on
That's
your
true.
athletics
That's
check.
true. That's not.
So
That's not so bad.
it's not wild at all.
You can't stack that with expertise to just
Proficiency,
like
the reason it works with the rogue is rogues are proficient kings. Everything else, a 10 is just, oh, I might succeed.
right. I didn't flub it. I will never fail an easy or medium roll.
Exactly.
We can look at
Which
that.
again might be better to do advantage because again, with a rogue it works because you're basically saying I'm so good, I effectively won't roll less than a 17 in the things that I'm good at. Is by 10th level is kind of what you're saying.
Because when your whole hat as a rogue is I'm competent, right? I'm Han Solo.
Yeah,
Like I'm good. I'm the best at what I do. I'm gonna sneak around. I'm gonna climb things. I'm never gonna look like a fool. That ability makes it so you never look like a fool at the thing you're supposed to be really good at.
absolutely. Whereas if we took that for this, rolling a 12 on athletics is really kind of like, okay, great, I didn't fall when I jumped out a window, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Whereas I think making it like advantage, you're like, oh, yeah, sometimes I'll roll a 5 and that sucks. But sometimes advantage made it to where I rolled a 17 with my +2. I rolled a 19. Okay, cool. I did a cool athletic thing. Again, we might play with that a bit just because I think we would have to get rid of their martial skills in order to give them the option of getting like athletics or acrobatics. And I just don't see that as being, to me, I see them getting the ability to fight, but not the ability to hop around and jump and climb, unless that was something, again, that's the beauty of backgrounds. Through your background, you can pick a background that gets acrobatics or athletics, and
Oh
that
no,
covers you there.
you're dead right. You're 100% right. You pick the soldier background or whatever, and you get the skills. No,
Yeah,
that's the
exactly.
solution. You're good. You're good.
That's what I love about fifth edition. Backgrounds can make again. How long? I think it was the whole Oriana. I played a fighter that eventually a blood hunter, and you thought I was a rogue almost the whole game.
Because you have the criminal background, right?
I was a criminal background, and I
Yeah.
was playing up to being sneaky, even though I never like. Why aren't you using sneak attack? Like, dude, I don't use sneak attack. I use action surge.
No, that really okay, great. So the channeler, my objection is clear. The channeler experience: you are lightly armored unless you're an incarnation, in which case you have medium armor. You are knowledgeable about like magic and the spirits and religion and such. You all the time you can cast your cantrips. We'll come up with a cantrip list. We'll see if we tie it into the mantles, and that's more complicated, or we just have a list.
And like you said, I think those are going to be more so supportive cantrips for the
Yeah,
most
like I
part.
imagine what does a channeler do? They have guidance and resistance, and that like little tiny divination spell that comes out at
Thaumaturgy,
um yeah,
prestidigitation,
yeah, yeah. They do like little things of support and consulting the spirits and all that crap.
absolutely.
All right, so they
I don't know if you saw, but I was trying to put the cantrips on the subclass. Like for instance, for incarnation, I was giving them cantrips like Blade Ward,
I
Booming
saw that on
Blade.
the incarnation. I thought it was a great idea.
For like the spiritualist, I was doing things like Chill Touch, Mage Hand, Message, Thaumaturgy, or for like the empath, things like Friends, Guidance, Resistance, Spare the Dying. You know, those I thought made some pretty good thematical sense to where you can pick two out of those four to where it's like, okay, cool, you have a cool little list to pick from, and you get a couple to go along with the very general ones you would get from just being a channeler.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Maybe
And then
we
we don't have to tie them to the
right,
mantle
right.
anymore.
And at most, like every mantle would have one cantrip.
Oh, I think that's a good idea. Like having like flame bolt, having chill touch, having very specific. I think that's a great idea. Having one cantrip, one passive, and then a list of spells. That to me seems
Right.
pretty
So
darn easy
so
and
maybe
good.
a level one channeler, like you pick your subclass, and that gives you two cantrips, and then you pick your two mantles, and now you have four cantrips, and you're set. right? Like that's your core toolkit. Whenever you don't activate your mantles, you have a set of 4 cantrips you pick from based on your
Yeah.
subclass and the mantles you pick. And as you level up and you get more mantles, you pick up new cantrips. So you'll always be able to like do damage or whatever your little thing is. And then a few times a day. Do you remember what it starts out at? Is it like 3?
For which one?
Mantles, activations.
2. You start off knowing 2, and you can only cast 2, and it's not until I believe 7th level before you can even cast 3. So it stays like that for a while.
And your activations re-up on
Short rest. We were making a short rest because it's low. If we made it long rest, I think we would have to give more uses to
right.
balance it out.
So essentially, it's kind of like a warlock, except that whereas a warlock, you always have your cantrips, and you have the best cantrip in the game. You have Eldritch Blast. So you're out there like, and then twice a short rest, you drop a level 1 spell, or and that goes higher and higher as you level up. So like you can do a nuke spell or a big utility spell, and you have your invocations. The Channeler has a subset of cantrips, and a few times a day they activate their mantle, and when they activate their mantle, they can either do a few small spells, or they can do like 1 or 2 big spells. So when you key up your mantle, you can be fighting and also like or you can keep your mantle, have your passive on, do a fireball if you're high enough level, and now you're out of points, but you still have your cool fire aura active. And
exactly. So like you were saying,
rest.
I know originally, mate, you were really into having the mantle have a duration, and the duration would be lowered by the stuff you cast. And I did like that. We can play around with. That's why I didn't get rid of your version of the channel that you were working on. I feel like, to me, I know that we were saying we were going to get a little loosey goosey with it. That one was a little too loosey goosey for me. I feel like having, again, a set duration that levels up with you, doing a minute and then plus half your channel level. I still think that's fun and fair. For me, though, I feel like playing off of what you said, where you can either blow your whole load and your mantle basically is gone, but to me, I feel like people would just sit on one point to make sure that, okay, I keep my passive. And then for me, that just doesn't feel like fun. That doesn't feel like something someone would be super jazzed. It's a.
The way that it would work is that you would spend a point every round just to keep it on. Right? Like you would activate your mantle, and then it starts out, here's your mantle pool, it starts out here. Every round, you must spend a point to continue using it. At the start of your turn, you can spend a point to keep it active. So every point is duration, and then you can cast from it, which shortens the duration.
No, absolutely. I think though, I like the idea, like you said, about using the Mystic as an example and keeping the points low. It makes it to where, again, you're like you were saying, it gives you that sense that you're either casting a lot of stuff really quick and then burning through it, or slow playing it. Whereas you still get the passive bonus, like no matter what. Again, you could always drop your mantle and open up a new one if you want more points, but you only get 2 of them. So if you do that, you're burning through your whole resources to get a bunch of big boosts real quick. And I think I like the idea, again, of like if you were doing someone like Marcus and you have the Dream Mantle and you want to I don't know what we're going to give that bonus, but you want to benefit from that bonus while still being able to cast like Suggestion on somebody or Dream on them or whatever. Again, I think we'll play with it. We might even have 2 different versions that we play test to see.
Yeah, we should play test both, because here's one of the things about that, right? If you key up your mantle and it's like you have 10, let's say 10 points, right? We're not going to use that number long term. You have 10 points. Every round at the beginning of your turn, you may spend a point to keep your mantle active. That's not an action. That's just something that happens at the start of your turn. Then you can cast spells from your mantle as an action or whatever, and they cost this many points. So if you cast, Magic Missile or whatever, you just knocked off 2 rounds off of your mantle. So it just got that much shorter.
Yeah.
And we'd have to play with the numbers to make sure that at level 1 you couldn't cast 10 magic missiles, right?
That's what that was my worry. And I thought that was a lot of, how like 5th edition took away like a lot of the math you have to do. To me, that feels like a lot of extra steps that you could eliminate by just doing something similar to this and getting a very similar, again, you're exhausting your uses of it. But I see what you mean, and I thought it was fun and good. And I think we should definitely try both and see what ends up kind of landing better.
And I think the key there for playtesting both versions is that in the version where you get it no matter what, and then you can either do a couple small things or one big thing, but you keep the passive no matter what, the passive should be cool, but not too cool. Whereas in the version where you are spending points every round, and if you cast spells from it, it gets even shorter, the passive should be pretty cool, because
Uh-huh.
then you have a stylistic choice, and I could definitely see like an empath activating or a spiritualist activating their mantle and just being like going Nova on the boss, whereas an incarnation activates their mantle, and let's say the mantle's a fire aura, and not only does it um, give them fire resistance, but they can, while it's active, all their attacks do plus their proficiency modifier in fire damage.
Yeah, so like you were saying, instead of casting a bunch of spells, you're basically just sitting on the mantle, getting the passive bonus, and then getting a very minor but very powerful ability off of just slow playing it.
Right, and then like if push comes to shove, as you're slow playing it, you're only spending 1 point a round. But now you like, okay, we are in trouble, or if I really hit this guy, it could push him over the edge. Do I spend the points or do I keep it? If I spend the points, I might be able to finish him off. But if I don't spend the point, then you get into those interesting decision making. Um, Spending a point to keep the mantle up every round sounds like the mantle is more of a side utility rather than the bread and butter of the class. Like that the mantle itself becomes a consumable rather than a window of opportunity. I could see that, and that's why
That's kind of how I felt about it. Yeah.
simply having the mantle active would need to be really cool. And the passives from just maintaining it, it would have to be very much like a barbarian uses their rage, and a barbarian can always fight, but what they really want is while they're raging, they're that much better and that much cooler. So,
I think kind of like piggybacking off of what some guy was saying, I feel like doing it the duration way, we would need to be careful about locking everything down on it. Because, for instance, if you can only cast spells while, aside from cantrips, of course, while the mantle is active, of course, you're probably going to want to slow play it to cast your spells out. But again, if you burn through it too quick, and then now you have no way to being able to do anything with it, you've kind of burnt through your passive and your spell casting and whatever bonus it could give you, to where again you're kind of like blowing all that out, and then now instead of being at least left with a passive, like again kind of looking at it to where, like, if you gave the barbarian a little more damage on its rage, but every time it used it, it burned through it, even once they burned through all their extra damage with their rage, they still get the resistant ability. That to me would feel a little more like thematic for a barbarian, rather than just saying, oh, now that you've burned through all your damage just with the rage feature, you no longer get the resistance to damage. Kind of something like that. I know it's not a perfect simile, but again, that's why I think we need to look at both options and see how it ends up. Looking at it like we've said, looking at something on paper versus seeing it play out, two
right,
completely different monsters.
because in my head, when you activate the mantle and it has this like burning wick, first off, Warlock on their short rest, they can cast 2 spells, and they know for sure, okay, I can cast 2 spells. Um, so
And they're going to be huge. Yeah.
if you key up a mantle, and activating the mantle gives you the opportunity to cast a cool spell, just one cool spell, and that burns through it, or like maybe it doesn't burn entirely through it, but like, okay, I key up my mantle, and then I cast one cool spell, and now I don't have enough to do it again, but I have like 2 or 3 rounds of this cool lingering effect, right?
Yeah.
And you can do that twice per short rest. That is as good, if not better, depending on how it's balanced, as being a warlock and being able to nuke someone twice. Because not only do you get this cool thing, but you also get like these perks of, and again, if as long as the perks are fairly cool, extra fire damage on every attack, or if you hit me, you take fire damage, something like that. Then that's still, I got to do a cool thing and I got this little bonus, or I got to go into beast mode for X rounds. And
Yeah.
so I think that the push comes to shove, as long as they are spectacular enough, but not like too overpowered, as long as you're able to do something cool twice, it really does fit into the warlock niche of being able to do something cool twice and still having a kit. Because with the barbarian is all about the rages, and when the rages are out, they're like, man, I don't have any more rages, but I still have a D12 hit dice and a big axe.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
so I think that it really depends on how do they play when they don't have that cool shit, when they don't have any more uses of their mantle. Are they still like, because you want to make the mantle a highlight, like this is my cool thing that I do, but also I have other things I can do around it. And
Absolutely.
I think part of that is going to be where the side abilities, empathic healing comes in, because empathic healing doesn't have a limit until you fucking die.
Yeah. I mean, like, especially at first level, once and done, basically. Because I mean, you figure even if you have, let's say, a +2 con, you're looking at sitting at 10 hit points, and once you've used it, I mean, gosh, you use it once, and you're really feeling it. You're like, okay, guys, it's time to rest now.
Yeah, yeah, it's an oh shit button.
It's absolutely a no shit button.
Let's see. So the incarnation.
Which is again why initially, and that's why playtesting will have to happen. That's why initially I was thinking the empath should take half of the damage it heals. Again, it can get kind of fucky with the whole you're healing more than you're taking, but there again, especially at lower levels, depending on how much you're healing, you're literally dying. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah, it's still pretty risky. What about building up charges while out of mantle to expend in mantle for cool actions? That's something we can look at, and that's another place where at level 5 the ability to refresh your points could come into play.
Exactly.
Like,
And initially we were trying to have that come in early. Actually, when we had a weird version of the mantle, that was actually a mantle you got was an absorption mantle, and the others you got through leveling up or through subclasses. But we couldn't find a good way to use the counterspell or dispel magic option, and not making. We had to play around with making it like a damage types instead of spells, and that really didn't fit along with what we were initially trying to do. It just felt like a long explanation, a little too wonky, and so we might play with it. It could be just as simple as having that ability come in earlier, but not getting the counterspell feature until later in the game. It really just is going to depend. But yes, I think that like both you mentioned and like Joe was saying, giving you a Nova Mantle that you can either slow play or burn through quick, but you get the option of refreshing the spell points that you use. Again, with the system you're saying, Joe, even if you have this Wit constantly burning, you can be absorbing these magical abilities people are throwing at you to kind of keep it going.
yeah, I think
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I used to play, constantly losing health always freaked me out in a game. I was on timer. I never had a good time with that. Uh, but again, it really depends on how we're able to present it and have it be played out.
both of these versions with some tweaks should be play tested, and I think we should explore other options for uh, refueling your mantle out of combat or whatnot. Because
Absolutely.
I really like. I think that the change you made to the absorption is very, very clean. And we
Yes.
might look at other absorption options for lower level options and stuff, but like this is super clean and I like it and I think it's a good option.
Well, and again, we didn't even get to the bonding rights. One of the things why I think it'd be okay to have a mantle that does expire, even though that is your main bread and butter thing, by third level, you're able to basically do, again, similar to either like a wizard or like a warlock, you're able to get certain little boons to kind of help you out. And whenever you're not either casting spells with your mantle or using one of your aspect abilities, you can choose one of, again, to help kind of customize what your channeler would be like. You can either get a right of the aura of the guide or of the relic. The aura basically would make it to where whenever your mantle is active, you're able to give the passive benefit to friendly creatures. And then again, I'm playing with how good that would actually feel and if people would actually be around. Because again, usually people will crowd around a paladin to get their save bonus, but the save bonus is huge.
Right.
It's always a massive boon. Not sure how that'll play out with this. So we could play with either and or make basically putting difficult terrain for hostile creatures that enter your aura. But it would basically be whenever you pop a mantle, you leave out this big aura of energy that makes people that are against you a little more hesitant to get close to you, and people who are your friends get this nice little boost. Or you have right of the guide where it basically gives you again a familiar, much like a lot of the other classes get. However, this one would add on that you could choose an elemental or an undead creature, um, as well as I was playing with the idea again, kind of going with your corporal thing, mate. Your idea of the whole spirits thing, thinking about giving them the idea that it can move through creatures or objects as difficult terrain, but again, they would get shunted and basically die if they ever tried to hide in something. Also, again, being like a guide, giving them like the guidance cantrip that they can only use on you. So that way you're basically picking a familiar that is just like, hey man, you're really good at being able to jump around. I know you didn't pick athletics, but I really need you to jump right now. Or again, you have that spirit that's walking around looking at all of the crime scene and giving you whispering in your ear saying, hey man, this is, you forgot to look on this table or forgot to check behind this desk or whatnot. And then we have something like the relic, where again, if you don't want to go full incarnate and take like a very martial specific subclass for your caster, you'd be able to have your aspect imbue an armor or weapon with some of its power, either choosing an armor, a shield, or a weapon. and while you are using it, you'd become proficient in it. So again, you could be a caster that has a shield, or that has a weapon, or you could pick an armor. Now again, with to kind of curb people from saying, hey, why wouldn't you just put this on heavy armor and now you rule because you're proficient with it? You can only use a mantle while you're wearing medium or less armor, kind of like a rage. It gives you like a limit that if you're using heavier armor, you can't activate a mantle.
Right. If you want to
But
do that, just play Paladin.
yeah, exactly. And so what this would do is that aside from being able to say, hey, I pick a weapon, I get the whole I can overcome, non-magic attacks and all that, or I can get proficiency with an armor or shields. It gives you one spell. And this one I probably would leave from any spell list because a lot of the abilities that are like this let you do this. So you basically have, like, let's just say, uh, a family heirloom that you're able to imbue with this effect, and effectively you can pick like, oh, I want to have the shield spell once per day, or I want to have locate out. Well, not locate out, that's a second level spell, but you would pick a spell that's very particular to something you'd want to do, and it gives you the ability to where outside of your mantles, it gives you something that you're able to do. So things like that.
Yeah. That plus, so your right plus your subclass would give you, and your cantrip selection would mean that even when you're pick spike growth, means that it actually came up in our last game when they were in the morass. I don't know which spell I hate. I think I do know which spell I hate more, but I hate both spike growth and pass without trace.
You hate pass without trace.
I do, man.
It's not that bad though, and especially with the recent Joe and I have been playing pass without trace very raw years, by the way. And I think that's one of the reasons why Joe thought it was worse than it actually was. Also, mate, did I tell you I recently had an interaction where I didn't like Pass Without Trace?
How so?
My party recently broke into a keep that, by using Pass Without Trace, as well as some of their really high level features, this was a quote unquote dungeon or a combat encounter area that was probably meant for characters between 3rd and 5th level, and these guys showed up coming here way late at 9th level. I beefed it up a little bit to kind of make it to where, okay, guys, you can't just avoid certain aspects of the game and then come back and rock it. But through the use of Pass Without Trace, they basically walked around and assassinated half the castle before anyone even really noticed. So that was my first foray into, wow, that maybe that isn't such a fun and fair spell. But a whole lot of it, again, is just planning. They had guards posted. They had people keeping watch. They came in the dead of night. So, I mean, it would have been a different scenario. It would have changed completely. But under the right circumstances, Pass Without Trace is nuts.
Like, if they use it as a clever problem-solving tool as part of a plan, I'm fine with that. The problem is when it's just like, this is the skip encounter button, which has a lot to do with encounter design more so than a bad spell. You know what I mean? Because,
oh yeah,
like, you're not going to call invisibility a bad spell. Mostly because it only affects one person.
No. Well, and here's the thing too, but here's the fun thing, especially because the game is built normally around dungeons. And I think part of our issue, mate, is that you and I like going on adventures. We don't like sticking people inside dungeons.
Yeah.
We like to send them on cool Lord of the Rings style epic adventures. And so a lot of times when you can skip an encounter, it almost feels like crap, why did I bother? But in a dungeon, if you skip the first few rooms, but then the boss gets alerted to you, now you have the whole dungeon coming after you. To where
when did
you've
that
now just
recently.
But you've now used this spell to bypass something, but now it comes back to bite you later. And I think that's one of the things that in the game as written, it's pretty balanced. But for us, again, when the hobbits can just run past the Uruk-hai, it feels a little more cheap.
Yeah. But again, a lot of that has to do with making sure you're writing interesting encounters with multiple fail states and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm going to need to call it soon. My eyes are getting tired.
Absolutely, and we've now hit that near 3-hour mark.
Yeah, which is kind of the golden target.
Absolutely. I do like the idea, though, of doing a one-shot pretty soon and definitely testing out what we've done here.
I agree. I also think that the version of the channeler who burns points every round to keep their mantle up, we may want to do auras for them. We may want to have, like, they always have an aura that affects their allies. Because then it becomes a much more significant choice, right? Because if you can, in the old school 3rd edition D&D, a bard had to use their action to do bardic inspiration, but it gave the whole party a massive advantage. So as a bard, like, you didn't get to do as much, but you made your whole party better. Versus the 5th edition bard who does something and also boops an ally as a bonus action. So if the channeler suddenly has the ability to activate this passive aura, but can still throw out cantrips and do stuff on their round, now it's a much bigger decision point of, do you want to maintain your aura or nuke this son of a bitch?
Oh yeah.
It's gonna go ahead.
Oh no, please no.
Yeah, some guys point about the channeler burning points every round. Like, very much so, yes, that is much more bookkeepy, and a feature like that would keep this class out of a core rulebook, frankly. Because that much bookkeeping is not, that's much more of an older edition. It's not in the spirit of 5th edition. It's one of the places where I'm experimenting with the concept. If you can create an interesting enough choice, because games are all about interesting choices. So if you can,
But again, there's no reason we couldn't have both. We could have the more Joe-centric, this is the fun channeler that does that, and then we have the, hey, this one might want to make it into some official material someday version of the channeler.
No, it for sure would involve a lot of bookkeeping. And so it's a question of, do we want to build a class that is geared towards people who like all the fiddly bookkeeping, or do we want to make a class that is easy to play and fits with the design principles of 5e? So we're going to have to fuck around with it.
Again, you can kind of see which one is the storyteller and which one is the mechanic guy.
Yes. Cool. Well, this has been awesome. We're going to do this again at some point. And I would like to do a deep dive into some Anakra lore at some point with you. Sovereigns and Titans and all that stuff. But Matt, like he said, is sort of the design mechanics mind of the two of us. He does a lot of the initial groundwork and a lot of the filing down of game mechanics to make things fair and fun and make sense. So this has been fun, dude. Thanks for coming on.
Dude, thank you for having me. I actually was a little bit hesitant in the past just because I always kind of felt like, oh no, I don't want to ruin Joe's thing. But this has been a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to getting the chance to do some more of this with you.
Oh yeah, I knew getting you to talk would not be a problem.
Well, again, this is a lot of fun. Thank you very much, everyone. And Joe, you a cool dude, man. Everyone knows it, but I gotta say, you are. I'm really proud of you, man. Just just kind of having a little bit of a shout out here. You've really been working really hard on this, and taking something that was really just kind of a pipe dream of ours, and really putting your heart and soul into it. I see you, man. I just want you to know. I know that I recently had a kid, and I'm kind of in the backseat of a lot of this, but you're really doing a good job, man. And I'm really happy for everything that you have going on.
Not gonna lie, I was expecting a sick roast, so you kind of took me off balance.
Yeah, I do that every now and then. Yeah.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. You've been here every step of the way. Couldn't do it without you. All right. It feels weird to go from that to answering questions in chat, but thanks, man. Empath transfers feels no.
Yes, I am exhausted now.
So the goal is to do something like this every Thursday. I will not be doing something like this next Thursday, due to a schedule conflict. But the goal is to continue doing something like this. Now, as long as Critical Role is off the air, I am going to try to bring back Tales from the Golden Bough and run it in this time slot. So it'll be a mixture of these hangout, talk shop, game design, lore talk stuff, interspersed with one-shots and Tales from the Golden Bough adventures and other stuff like that. When Critical Role comes back, this time slot, in the end, nothing is forever. It all depends on work and coronavirus and all that stuff. When Critical Role comes back, Matt and I will likely continue to do this as a regular thing. Maybe bring on some guests, world building and game design and stuff to chat with them. But we'll continue this sort of hangout format. But I will have some actual game format in this time slot as well.
The one Tales of the Golden Bough I got to play in, that was a lot of fun. We had a group of people. It was a fun premise, and
that was the alpha test for Golden Bough.
I think it's a really fun idea, and I'm looking forward to, if I get the chance to, being able to show up in some of those. That sounds like a really fun time.
Yeah, roll up a channeler, and we'll get you in.
Oh, dude, you remember Mr. Mogwai? I'm just gonna take that dude and just throw a channeler.
Yeah.
If you guys like hearing someone talk really slow and interrupting people through a voice chat system, then you're gonna love that.
Awesome. All right, folks. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next time.